Chapter 701, Four Hunters. Soon after the shadows left, the connection Sunny shared with them grew faint. He could still feel their existence, but not much beyond that. The same happened with the happy and creepy shadows. When Nightmare and the Soul Serpent left the range of shadow control, which had grown to about 4 kilometers, he lost the ability to perceive them and the world through them. Sunny felt that they were out there somewhere, but that was it. The sudden loss of being able to see and hear through 2 out of his 3 shadows was abrupt and jarring, as though he had suddenly lost an eye and a limb. It made Sunny feel very uncomfortable. Not only was his power severely diminished in the absence of his loyal companions, making him extremely vulnerable, but he also worried about them. There had been many opportunities to send Saint away to hunt on her own in the past, but Sunny never did. The risk was just too high, both for the shadow and for himself. They were stronger together. Shadows were not meant to be apart from their master. But there was no other choice now. He did not know when the 3 chain lords were going to act, exactly, but there was not much time left before. Before the final confrontation began, Sunny had to become a devil. Neff was already a tyrant after all. It would not do to let her remain so far ahead. With a sigh, he turned around and walked back to his room. The gloomy shadow followed, trying to not show that it too missed its siblings. The shadows were gone, but there was still a lot Sunny had to do. He had to prepare himself for the battle, both mentally and physically. The next few days passed without too much happening. Sunny trained archery with Kai, practiced swordsmanship with Cassie, and sharpened his mastery of the spear with Effie's help. The other 3 were busy with their own preparations as well. From time to time, all 4 left the sanctuary to hunt and put their teamwork to the test. Sunny received a few fragments from those small expeditions as well. In the night, he continued to experiment with weaving. However, he was also careful to get enough sleep. It would not do to go into the final battle exhausted. After several days of this, while Sunny was laying in bed, the spell suddenly whispered into his ear. "You have slain a fallen monster, veiled slayer. Your shadow grows stronger." Sunny sat up and stared into the darkness tense. So one of them had found a prey. He did not know which one it was, Saint, Serpent, or Nightmare, or even if they were wounded in the fight. All he knew was that one of his shadows had emerged victorious and was not destroyed. After that first kill, the shadow fragments started to pour into his soul frequently, making the goal of forming a new core before the fateful clash seem less hopeless. In the meantime, all Sunny could do was carry on. 2 weeks of practicing weaving later, he could proudly say that he had successfully managed to destroy 38 out of the 39 memories received in the Red Colosseum. The only one remaining was the Emerald Bone Flute. However, that saved him from damaging his actual memories at least. After the initial success of transplanting enchantments, Sunny found out that it was not as easy as he had thought. Well, it had never really been easy, but now he realized that there were more things he had to consider than simply the pattern of the weave itself. Each memory had a certain capacity when it came to accommodating enchantments. The more powerful an enchantment was, the more burden it put on the weave. To withstand it, weaves needed to be moored to anchors, each serving as a nexus for the strings of essence. Sunny created those anchors from soul shards. The more he used, the higher the tier of the memory was, and the higher its capacity. However, the rank of the shards also played a role, albeit in a slightly different manner. Apart from capacity, weaves also had a threshold of intensity they could withstand. More powerful enchantments put too much strain on the strings and the anchors, and so both the strings and the anchors had to be of a high enough rank to endure it. Additionally, only the weakest of enchantments could be activated passively, relying on the memory's own ambient soul energy. Everything else would only function when saturated by the flow of essence from the wielder's soul. But that was not all. Sunny had found out the hard way that not all memories could accommodate all enchantments, regardless of whether they had enough capacity and tolerance. Some were simply not meant for each other. He suspected that the name of the memory, and therefore its nature, played a role in that. He had transferred the sonorous enchantments to the silver bell and the ordinary rock, and also made the ordinary rock, which had been able to repeat the sounds it heard, repeat the words Sunny thought of as well. Both of these changes improved upon the original qualities of the memories instead of introducing something entirely new. They were not in conflict with their natures. However, when he tried to do something more radical, the results were disastrous. He could not add an enchantment meant to destroy to a memory that was meant to protect, unless he wanted the whole weave to break apart. It was not easy to understand the true nature of memories. However, the patient avenger, for example, was a shield, and its purpose was to protect its master. And yet that shield possessed enchantments capable of sowing utter devastation on the battlefield. So, it took Sunny a lot of time, and a lot of wasted memories, to get an initial grasp on the nuances of what enchantments he could transfer and where. The hint was under his nose the whole time. The name of the memory hid the secret of its nature. He was still unable to fully grasp it, but after destroying dozens of memories, Sunny managed to develop an intuitive sense that allowed him to glean the general direction of things, at least. It was not much, but it was something. At the start of their 5th month in the nightmare, Sunny found himself on a somewhat familiar island. Some distance away from him, a forest of tall trees stood, darkness nesting between their trunks. The forest looked different from how it had been in the future. There, the trees were twisted and bent, their bark turned dark and rough. But here, they had no need to change and adapt to the devastating burden of the crushing yet, and so the forest stood tall. The wolves, however, were more or less the same. The nightmare creature lunging at him was the size of a small truck, with fur as tough as steel wire and a long, terrifying muzzle. Its jaws were wide enough to bite a human in half and strong enough to crush both bones and armor into dust. As the giant beast jumped at him, Sunny dodged left and allowed Effie to barrel into the creature, her fist sending it flying to the ground with a whimper. A second later, an arrow landed from above, piercing one of the wolf's paws and nailing it to the ground. A slender rapier flashed through the air, doing the same with another. Effie appeared near the wolf, pressing it down with all her inhuman strength, and shouted, "Come on, the bastard is strong. Really strong." Sunny did not make them wait. Jumping forward, he brandished the cruel sight and buried it between the abomination's 6 glowing eyes. Almost instantly, the flame of madness burning in them dimmed and then was extinguished. Sunny sighed as the spell whispered, "You have slain a fallen monster, dread wolf. Your shadow grows stronger." He did not need the help of the cohort to slay a dread wolf, of course. These vile beasts were easy prey for someone like him. He did, however, require their assistance for what was about to happen next. Summoning the runes, Sunny found the familiar string of them. The runes read, "Shadow fragments, 3,000, Flove 3,000. He prepared himself, and a moment later, the voice of the spell resounded once again. "Your shadow is overflowing with power." It was time for him to become a devil. Chapter 702, Devil. Sunny sighed, then dismissed the runes, feeling the familiar heat igniting deep within his soul, growing stronger and stronger with each breath. Effie and Kai looked at him, curiosity and concern mixing in their eyes. Cassie silently retrieved the quiet dancer and turned away, listening to the dark forest that surrounded them. A few moments later, the little girl asked, "So, what exactly happens now?" Sunny gave her a grim look. "Now I will scream and thrash for a while. Forming a new core is probably the 3rd worst pain I have ever experienced, and that was just the demon core. Damnation." Effie blinked a couple of times. "What are the 2nd and the absolute worst, then?" He hesitated for a bit, and then said hoarsely, "Attaining a daemon's lineage was pretty bad. But the most terrible thing by far was catching a glimpse of fate. That one I only survived by accident." The gloomy shadow shivered, remembering their past. Sunny, meanwhile, scoffed. "Being gutted by the Black Knight did not even make the list, huh? Maybe I need to rethink my life choices." At that moment, the heat burning within his soul reached a critical point, and the spell whispered into his ear, "Your shadow is taking shape." A blinding pain exploded in his chest, sending Sunny to his knees. He gritted his teeth and remained silent, refusing to let out a shriek, a wail, or even a growl. This was not his first time experiencing that pain, even though, this time, it was far more intense. A human soul was not meant to contain many cores. That was the conclusion Sunny had come to a while back, thinking about how the process of awakening was pleasant and euphoric, but gaining new cores and a daemon's lineage was harrowing and torturous. Humans were meant to walk the path of ascension, but becoming a different type of creature was against their nature, and Weaver's lineage was simply against all nature. It was aberrant and forbidden, something that was never meant to exist at all. Arg. The pain grew stronger, and then stronger still. Just like before, he felt as though his soul was being torn apart, something rising from its depths and cutting his very being with its sharp edges. However, Sunny was used to this torment. He accepted it, allowed himself to dissipate into it, and endured. However, then, something entirely unexpected happened. As his soul was going through a transformation, his body followed suit as well, catching him by surprise. This time, Sunny failed to suppress a scream and fell to the ground in convulsions. Effie and Kai stared at him with worry. Curse it! What the hell? It felt as though his bones were breaking, his muscles were tearing, and his skin was on fire. Sunny clawed at the ground, then raised his head and let out a deafening, furious roar. As it rolled across the forest, the roar changed, growing lower and more frightening. Finally, an eternity later, the heat consuming his soul grew cold, and his tortured body was released from the cage of suffering. Sunny exhaled hoarsely, then relaxed and remained laying on the grass, motionless. The voice of the spell resounded from the darkness, echoing between the ancient trees. Your shadow is complete. And a few moments later, he heard another voice, this one soft and childish. Goddamn, he is even bigger now. Sunny slowly stood up, intending to take a look at his runes. However, even before that, he noticed that something was different. The ground was considerably further down than it had been before. Huh? Effie and Kai were staring at him, forgetting their task of watching out for a potential attack. Luckily, Cassie was still vigilant. Sunny frowned, then glanced down to take a look at his own body as well. It seemed that because he was in a body of a creature, the transformation into a devil changed it too. The shadow demon devil grew even taller, now standing at almost 3 meters of height. His skin had turned into a darker shade of gray, and his claws seemed as if they were cut out of glossy morion. Through the eyes of his shadow, Sunny could see that his horns had grown longer and sharper as well. More than that, there were now 4 of them, 3.5, considering that one had been broken in the ferocious fight with the Ascended War maiden Hilda. And his eyes, which had been entirely black previously, now seemed like 2 pools of eerie darkness. The shadow spawn had been fearsome before, but now he was simply terrifying. Even Sunny himself would not have been happy to meet this towering fiend on a moonless night. Effie shook her head, then looked away. My neck hurts from staring at you. Is this how everyone feels when they're talking to me? Kai hesitated, then smiled slightly. Ah, well, that is presuming that they are looking at your face. The little girl snorted. Wow, good one. You've been hanging out with Sunny way too much, it seems, or, with me? Ignoring her jabs, Sunny curiously looked at the ground. He had gained a new shadow. After all, what would its personality be? 2 identical shadows of a 4-armed devil were there, staring at each other. Nevertheless, to Sunny, they seemed very different. One was gloomy and glowering, full of bad mood and disdain. The other was also full of disdain, but of another kind. The new guy somehow managed to seem noble and gallant, despite being the exact copy of the other shadow, looking at it with arrogant contempt. They were of the exact same height, and yet the haughty shadow somehow made it seem as if it was looking down at the gloomy one and everyone else, for that matter. Back when the creepy shadow appeared, it lost the staring contest to the gloomy shadow. The haughty shadow, however, did not seem impressed even a little bit. It was as though the very thought of looking away was beneath it. So, the 2 of them just continued to drill holes into each other, with disdainful stares. Unperturbed, Sunny groaned, then covered his face with a hand. Oh gods, there's 2 of them now. Observing the staring contest, Sunny sighed. He was beginning to miss the happy shadow, that hopeless fool, something that had never thought he would ever feel. Shaking his head, Sunny looked away from the shadows and summoned the runes. The familiar symbols shimmered in the air in front of him. Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Awakened. Class, Devil. Shadow cores, 4/7. Shadow fragments, 0.40,000. A tired but satisfied smile appeared on his lips. With a fourth core, his power would increase significantly. His essence reserves had grown. The range of shadow control had expanded, and most importantly, he now had an additional shadow to augment either himself, his memories, or his shadows. He could increase his physical prowess fivefold, or send one each to Saint, Serpent, and Nightmare, while leaving one for himself. And that was not all. The Soul Serpent evolved its class when Sunny did, so it should have become a devil as well. That would make it the most powerful, at least in terms of pure status, shadow of his. Not wasting any time, Sunny summoned the serpent's runes. Somewhat tense, he read, Shadow, Soul Serpent. Shadow rank, Ascended. Shadow class, Devil. Shadow attributes, Shadow Guide, Soul Weapon, Soul Beast. Sunny was both glad and worried. Glad because his shadow had attained a new class, but worried because he did not see any new attributes. The transformation to a devil was supposed to gift creatures terrible and unnatural powers, however. The serpent was a bit strange in that regard. It had received a new ability out of order when rising to a new rank. So would it receive anything now? Luckily, he was wrong to fear. Looking lower, Sunny saw a few new runes among the serpent's abilities. Shadow abilities, Serpentine Steel. Soul Reaver, Grace of Shadows, Formless. The Formless one was new. Sunny concentrated on it and studied the description curiously. A moment later, a strange sound escaped from his lips. The runes read, Formless Ability Description. When in the soul beast form, the serpent can assume the shape of any shadow contained within its master's soul, inheriting all powers and abilities. The shadow must be of the same or lower rank and class than the soul serpent for the transformation to take place, and won't be consumed in the process. Chapter 703, Way Back. Soon after settling into his new and improved body, Sunny dismissed his shadows. He expected them to instantly return to his cores, but this time there was a delay. It seemed that he had to wait for some time before Saint, Nightmare, and the Soul Serpent returned. And then there were the happy and the creepy shadows. Poor guys were going to have to come back the usual way, by gliding across the Kingdom of Hope one island at a time. They were swift and sneaky, so Sunny was not too worried about them. He also knew that the shadows always sensed in which direction to go to return to their master. Sunny had gained this bit of knowledge a while back, when his experiments with Shadow Step left the gloomy guy outside of the range of shadow control. The shadow had swiftly returned, acting even more petulant and moody than usual. Its mood had only grown worse when Sunny decided to try and repeat the accident a few more times, just to make sure. But as the result, he learned that once separated from him, the shadows would always try to find their way back to their master, somehow sensing where he was. And speaking of shadows, the haughty newcomer was still acting cavalier, radiating a disdainful certainty that it was, without a doubt, better and more distinguished than everyone, and everything in every way imaginable. Sunny shook his head and silently commanded the haughty shadow to wrap itself around his body, which it did, but not before giving him a look that clearly expressed how utterly beneath itself the arrogant guy considered such a trivial task to be. The members of the cohort had already collected the soul shards from the slain abominations, so there was nothing holding them on the island anymore. They started the journey back to the sanctuary and returned to it at dusk. On the way, Sunny was trying to get used to his new physique. Sure, the shadow spawn had grown taller and more powerful, but as a side effect of that, he had to relearn how to move in this towering body all over again. The shock was not as dire as when he had first appeared in the nightmare, but it would still require some time for Sunny to be able to adjust his mindset and battle technique for this new circumstance. Tired after the day of hunting nightmare creatures and traversing the heavenly chains, the four of them separated to go to their rooms. Reaching his own, Sunny fell on the bed, which was now a bit too short for him, and stared at the ceiling for some time, feeling restless and grim. Today, he had accomplished something that he never thought would be possible in such a short span of time. He had formed the fourth shadow core and become a devil. He was now more powerful than he had ever been, with three mighty shadows by his side, an arsenal of powerful memories at his disposal, and even possessing a nascent knowledge of sorcery and weaving. In fact, Sunny suspected that there had never been an awakened as powerful as him, except, of course, for Mordred, at least until Nephis returned from being lost in the dream realm and awakened herself. And yet, he couldn't help but wonder, would that be enough for what was about to come? And if he survives the nightmare, would it still be possible for him to hide his strength and avoid the gaze of sovereigns? Tormented by these questions, Sunny remained awake for a long time, and then finally fell into the embrace of shallow sleep. When the morning came, he opened his eyes and instantly sensed a difference. His heart felt at ease, somehow, complete. His shadows had returned while he slept. Luckily, all three had survived their task. However, they were not unscathed. Both Nightmare and the Soul Serpent bore many wounds and nestled in the nurturing black flames of his cores, slumbering as their bodies restored themselves. Saint was banged up too, but to a much lesser extent. Even though she had not had the company of a shadow, the taciturn knight fared much better than the other two. Well, that was not a surprise. She possessed attributes that specifically made her tremendously stalwart and durable after all. Plus, Saint was Saint. In any case, she was going to heal and recover much faster. The happy and creepy shadows had returned as well, and were now staring at their new sibling, the former with delighted excitement, the latter with dark and disturbing fascination. The haughty shadow ignored their stares and pretended that the others did not exist, looking past them with flawlessly disdainful indifference. What a character. Sunny smiled, then commanded the three shadows to wrap themselves around his body, leaving only the gloomy one on the ground. Finally feeling like himself, he climbed out of bed, freshened up, and went to find Noctis. There was a lot they had to discuss. When he saw the sorcerer, however, the words died on his tongue. Noctis was not on board his flying ship, and neither was he on the edge of the island, sculpting his terrible statues. Instead, the immortal transcendent had returned to his residence for once. The wooden door stood open, and the sailor dolls let Sunny through without sparing him a single glace. The interior of the sorcerer's quarters had changed once again. The floor stood cracked and broken, mounds of stone shards arching upward, as if displaced by something rising from below. The circle of runes was broken, as well, devoid of any essence and utterly empty. That, however, was not what scared Sunny. What made him stumble, instead, was that Noctis was not holding a glass of wine, as had been his habit. Instead, the sorcerer was whistling a carefree tune and brewing himself tea. Sunny froze. Oh crap. What had it been that the sorcerer told him soon after they met? Gather the knives, start a war against both the Ivory City and the Red Colosseum, kill all of the Chain Lords, defy the Lord of Light, break the will of gods, release the demon of desire out of her prison, and have a cup of tea. But then Noctis corrected himself and said that he should probably have tea first. Sunny gulped. It's starting. Chapter 704, A Cup of Tea. As Sunny was standing still, petrified by what he saw, Noctis finished brewing the tea and poured the amber liquid into a beautiful porcelain cup. Then the sorcerer raised it to his face, inhaled the fragrant steam, and let out a satisfied sigh. Then, noticing an unexpected guest, he glanced at Sunny and smiled. Sunless, what a nice surprise. Wait, did something about you change? The sorcerer tilted his head with a confused expression, studied the towering figure of the shadow devil for a few moments, and then suddenly brightened up. Oh, it's your horn. When did you break it? Really? That is what he noticed. Sunny stared at the cup in the immortal's hands, then grasped the extraordinary rock. He didn't really have to hold the memory to make use of it. But at the moment, Sunny was experiencing a desperate need to hold on to something, anything. Taking a careful breath, he gripped the rock and said hoarsely, back in the Temple of the Chalice, You are drinking tea? Noctis lingered for a bit, glanced at his cup, and then smiled. What a prudent observation. Come, let's not let this nice tea get cold. With that, the sorcerer turned around and headed deeper into his residence, gesturing for Sunny to follow. The teapot flew into the air and hovered above the immortal's shoulder as well. As soon as Sunny made a step forward, however, Noctis suddenly turned, looked at him with a strange expression, and said, try not to step on anything that seems to be actually. Just don't move at all. We don't want for anything to happen, right? At that moment, the chamber trembled again, and more cracks appeared on its stone floor. Sunny stared down with a somber expression, then sighed and used Shadow Step to appear near the sorcerer. Why? What's under there? Noctis smiled. Oh, nothing. Just a memento from an old friend. Don't worry about it. Sunny, however, did worry. He was not a complete fool. The vast circle of runes, the torrential flood of soul essence that the sorcerer saturated it with, the pool of blood that the ancient stones had absorbed, all of it pointed to something dreadful being imprisoned, or maybe created, there in the darkness of the earth. However, he thought better of asking any questions and simply followed Noctis to the stone stairs, situated on the other side of the chamber. Using them, they ascended to the top of the ring of giant menhirs and sat down at an elegant wooden table. The sorcerer leaned back in his chair, gazed upon the breathtaking vista of the Kingdom of Hope, and took a sip of tea with an expression of deep satisfaction on his face. Sunny lingered for a few moments, giving Noctis time to enjoy himself, and then asked, "It has begun, hasn't it? The other chain lords, they are ready to make their move." The sorcerer took another sip, sighed, and then said in a relaxed tone, "Oh, indeed. I suspect that their herald will arrive in a few days, so you might want to relax for a bit. Enjoy the tea. This will probably be the last moment of peace you will have for a while, Sunless, or maybe even the very last." Sunny remained silent for a long time, a myriad of important questions pressing on his mind, but then he simply shook his head, chased them away, and poured some tea into a delicate cup that stood on the table, as if waiting for him. Neither of them spoke for a while, enjoying the fragrant drink and the beautiful sight of the flying islands in peace. Despite the approaching doom, the world felt tranquil and warm here, on the parapet of the sanctuary. After a while, Noctis sighed and said in a wistful tone, "I am going to miss this, I think." Then he glanced at Sunny and asked with a hint of curiosity in his voice, "Tell me, Sunless, why are you here? It is no surprise that someone like me would want to free Hope, but what would compel a shadow like you to attempt it as well? You must know the risk." Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then sighed. "To tell you the truth, I don't really know. I used to know, or at least think that I knew. I had lofty desires, to grow stronger than others, to break free from the chains of fate, and maybe I harbor those desires still. But after coming to this cursed land and being ground into dust by it now, everything is so unclear, and my ardent desires suddenly seem so lacking." He paused, looked down, and then added evenly, "Or maybe it's just me who is lacking and lost." Noctis glanced at him, took a sip of tea, and asked with a curious smile, "What is it that you think you are lacking, and from what are you lost?" Sunny did not speak immediately, letting the pressure of the flaw build inside his soul for a few moments. Then he said with a grin, "How should I know? If I had an answer for that, I wouldn't be feeling this way, would I?" He chuckled, and then asked, "Have you heard the legend of a hero named Odysseus?" Noctis blinked a couple of times, then shook his head. "Never heard of that guy. A legend, really. Huh. Strange that some third-rate hero I don't even know got to have a whole legend to himself." Sunny smiled, and then said, "A good friend told me that legend. Odysseus spent 10 years away from home, fighting a war in a distant land. And then he spent 10 more years trying to find his way back home. He lost all his friends and endured countless hardships, facing terrible monsters and dangerous beings of all sorts. But he never gave up and eventually returned home to Ithaca." His smile disappeared, replaced by a distant expression. After a few moments of silence, Sunny sighed. "I feel like Odysseus too sometimes. Lost in a distant land. Only, unlike him, I don't have a home to want to return to. I have nothing to strive for, apart from saving my skin, keeping my friends alive. and maybe living a little bit better than a wild beast. Can someone really be lost if they don't belong anywhere? Noctis took a sip of his tea, solemnly pondered on it for a bit, and then said thoughtfully, I see. I understand. So what you lack is a house. That is why you are trying to free Hope. To get a house? Wait, Sunless. Are you trying to say that you want to repossess the ivory tower? Sunny choked on his tea, then glared at the sorcerer with outrage. What even? No, that is not what I am saying. Home is just a metaphor, you immortal fool. Noctis blinked a couple of times, then asked with a deadpan expression, What's a metaphor? Sunny stared at him for a few moments, then snorted and opened his mouth, intending to answer. Before he did, however, a loud rattling of chains resounded in the air, and the whole sanctuary shuddered slightly beneath them. No, it was the island itself. The whole island trembled. Sunny froze, and then asked, his voice tense and grim, What the hell was that? Noctis calmly finished his tea, closed his eyes in delight for a moment, and then looked west. It's their herald, I guess. He seems to have arrived sooner than I expected. Ah, what a bother. We didn't even get to drink the whole pot. Chapter 705, Herald of the Sun. Noctis sighed, then placed his empty cup on the table and stood up. He straightened the folds of his silk garment, then shook his head with a slight smile and headed across the stone plain of the menhirs. Sunny scrambled to catch up to him, full of apprehension. The first thing he said to the sorcerer, however, had nothing to do with the messenger of the chain lords. A metaphor is a figure of speech, sort of like an analogy. Noctis glanced at him with surprise. I must say, your composure is commendable, Sunless. However, do you really think that this is very important right now? Come now, we need to meet our visitor before he reaches the sanctuary. The sorcerer gestured at the silhouette of the flying ship that hovered some distance away, almost at the same height as them. Sunny summoned the dark wing, and then said, No, I don't. Why can't we meet the herald here, though? No, wait, if he did not even reach the sanctuary yet, why is the island shaking? Noctis shrugged and gracefully rose into the air, flying toward the ship. What means he was using to do so, Sunny did not know. All he could do was jump as high as he could and then glide forward. The sorcerer glanced at him and then said somberly, If we were to meet the herald here, my beautiful sanctuary might well get damaged. That would not do. As to why the island is shaking, I guess we'll see. Soon they landed on the deck. The sailor dolls had already raised the sails and were hurrying around, preparing the ship for departure. Cassie, Kai, and Effie were also there, although they seemed to have arrived only moments before Sunny and Noctis. As Sunny looked at them with a silent question, Effie simply nodded toward Cassie. The mystery of their swift reaction was easily revealed. The sorcerer went to the stern of the flying ship without wasting any time, and took his position as the Kybernates, the guide who steered the ship as it flew through the air. The ancient vessel had no steering wheel, of course, and instead relied on 2 steering oars, which were situated at the very rear of it. There was a runic circle inscribed between the oars. Noctis stepped inside, turned, leaned comfortably on the bending inner surface of the tall apluster, and placed his hands on the oars with a relaxed expression on his face. A moment later, the circle shimmered with ethereal light. The flying ship had to be controlled both physically and with soul essence. There were invisible energy pathways spanning the whole length of it, all leading to the roots of the beautiful tree growing around the main mast. Luckily, it was the tree that produced the tremendous flow of essence required to propel the vessel through the air, and not the Kybernates. Otherwise, Cassie would have never been able to fly it in the future. However, the pilot still needed to control that flow and serve as its nexus, and so, only an awakened could do it. Or a transcendent. Noctis sent his own essence into the runic circle, connecting his soul to the ship, and the ancient vessel slowly started to move, gaining speed as the wind filled its sails. Holding the oars with a carefree smile, the sorcerer then glanced at Cassie and said, Song of the Fallen, my lady, you wish to observe how I control this beauty? Here is your chance to see a master at work. Truly, there is no helmsman more skilled and distinguished than me in the whole of the Kingdom of Hope. Granted, this flight won't be too long. He suddenly grew silent. glanced at the blind girl with a guilty expression on his face, and then awkwardly cleared his throat. Well, I guess C was the wrong word to use. Cassie remained silent for a few moments, then said neutrally, I am used to it. Do not worry. Knowing that the young woman had been interested in the flying ship and its mysteries, Sonny left the two of them alone and walked to the side, staring into the distance with a tense look on his face. Noctis had failed to explain why the approach of the herald caused the sanctuary to tremble, but Sonny had an idea. The islands were all connected to each other by the heavenly chains, and so any strong tremor was bound to spread outward like a wave. The question was, what could have caused a quake strong enough for them to feel from several islands away? Perhaps a giant steel colossus could. He gritted his teeth. A messenger of the chain lords. Was that a joke? Noctis conveniently failed to mention that this herald was going to be one of those lords himself. And what the hell had the sorcerer meant, saying that they had to meet the herald elsewhere to avoid damaging the sanctuary? Weren't they simply going to speak? That was what messengers were for. Weren't they to deliver words? As several islands flowed past beneath the speeding ship, he suddenly caught sight of an especially familiar one. Of course, in this era, it looked different. The Iron Hand Island was still rather large and covered by soft grass, but the ancient stone columns that had been broken in the future still stood tall, forming 3 concentric circles. From above, they seemed like a giant sundial or moondial, perhaps. And, of course, there was no colossal iron hand laying in the center of the island to give it the peculiar name. At least, not yet. Sonny suddenly felt cold shivers run down his spine. He didn't have time to think about it more, however, because at that moment, something else attracted his attention. Some distance away, shrouded in the haze of dawn, he could see the neighboring island. Currently, it was in a higher position than them. The island suddenly swayed, and a small human figure jumped from its edge. Or rather, it just seemed small because of the distance. Sonny felt Kai grow still and tense by his side. As the sun shined on its steel surface, the figure flew through the air, covering an unimaginable distance with its leap. It seemed to be moving slowly, but Sonny knew that this was just a mirage caused by the scale of things. And indeed, the radiant figure grew larger and larger with each moment, turning into a brilliant steel giant as it drew closer. Easily breaching several kilometers with his jump, the giant landed on the surface of the Iron Hand Island, causing the whole of it to lurch sideways and sway. The heavenly chains rattled wildly, and a cloud of debris was raised into the air. Not paying the chaos he had caused any attention, the colossus then slowly straightened, grew motionless, and then slightly turned his head. He was looking directly at the flying ship, no expression written on his beautiful steel face, 2 suns reflecting in the polished surface of his steel eyes. The Sun Prince had come to deliver a message to Noctis. Chapter 706, Ultimatum. Looking at the Colossus, Sonny understood why Kai had called him terrifying. Sun Prince stood at nearly 90 meters tall, towering above the island like a mountain of steel. He was cast in the shape of a noble warrior wearing light armor. The surface of the armor was polished and shone blindingly in the sun, while the rest of the giant was dull and gray. The colossal statues of the 7 heroes of the Forgotten Shore, including the walking one Sonny and the cohort had ridden once, were more than twice as tall. But it was hard not to get shocked by the sheer mass and crushing presence of the transcendent Chain Lord, or rather of the steel shell he was entombed within. A sickening feeling of fear grasped Sonny's heart, which he then strangled and banished, looking at the towering lord with a grim expression. He had a reason to feel fear, however. A half-forgotten image of a nightmarish scene flashed before his eyes, a fragment of a nightmare where he stood petrified on a blood-soaked battlefield, watching in horror as a giant steel soul descended from above to turn him and his fellow soldiers into puddles of crushed bones and bloody sludge. And another, a memory of endless, harrowing torture that he had endured at the hands of his brother, of a human-shaped cage and a pit filled with molten metal. And finally the last one, the vision of a giant steel corpse swinging forlornly in torn chains, upside down, its chest shattered by some devastating strike. So this was Sun Prince. Sonny had never met him, and yet it felt as though they were old acquaintances. For better or worse, As the giant stared at the flying ship with a motionless face of a statue, Sunny turned to Noctis and scowled. Now what? The sorcerer sighed, then moved one of the oars, sending the vessel into a descent. His carefree smile was starting to look a little forced. Now, well, we go and talk to him, I guess. Have a civilized discussion. Sunny turned back and looked at Sun Prince for a bit, then said somberly, "Do you think he knows that it was you who erased his memory of hiding the ivory knife, causing him to experience 100 years of torture, and then end up in this state? And that you actually stole it instead?" Noctis suddenly choked, causing the ship to careen sideways, and hissed. "Say it louder, will you?" Sunny froze. "Oh, sorry." The sorcerer righted the vessel, then said with outrage, "First of all, I did not cause anything. I just granted a colleague's request. Back then, we did not even know that hope was driving us all mad, so how was I supposed to know what will happen? Secondly, I did not steal the ivory knife. I just happened to find it where he had left it, all right, by pure coincidence. And lastly," he paused and then added in a darker tone, "I am not sure that he really knows anything anymore. He is still alive, somewhere inside, but I don't think he is fully sentient. At least I hope that he is not." The ship approached the ground in somber silence, stopping just outside the first ring of pillars and hovered in place. Noctis lingered for a few moments and then let go of the oars. However, he did not command the sailor dolls to lower the sails. The sorcerer straightened his garments and then inhaled deeply. "Let's go and see what he has to say, shall we?" Sunny glanced at his friends, then shook his head and followed Noctis. There was a high chance that they were going to witness a brawl between saints. He was sure that everyone understood what danger they were all in. The last time he witnessed two saints fighting, a whole island had been destroyed and crumbled into the sky below. Sunny and Cassie had only survived that terrifying clash by promptly running away, and even then just barely. What was going to happen today? And was Noctis strong enough to ward off the Colossus? Somehow it was hard to imagine anything, let alone the flimsy sorcerer, stopping that mountain of steel. But Noctis was no fool, surely. He had a plan. His madness was of an insidious kind, after all. He would not have risked his safety and his desire to free Hope without having a way out. Together, the five of them disembarked the flying ship, landed on the soil of the Iron Hand Island, and walked between the tall pillars. They approached the very center of the giant moondial and stopped there, waiting. When they did, Sun Prince finally moved, walking toward them with a measured gait. With each of his steps, the island trembled, causing the heavenly chains to rattle and their hearts to tremble. Sunny was staring at the approaching Colossus, feeling worse and worse about the situation. All his shadows were yet to recover, and so he was left with nothing but his own strength to react, should something happen. Well, his own strength, and that of his cohort. But what could they do against this monstrosity, even together? Finally, the giant reached the pillars and stopped outside the outward circle, looking at them from high above. Drowned in his cold shadow, Sunny couldn't help but feel like a tiny insect. Looking up with a grave expression, he gritted his teeth and said, "I feel like an ant." Effie, who was also craning her neck to stare at the Colossus, glanced at him, hesitated for a moment, and then smiled. "You are not an ant, Sunny. You are a cockroach, remember?" He blinked a couple of times, then slowly grinned. Somehow, that made him feel better. And then a thundering voice suddenly resounded from all around them, making their bones rattle. The giant spoke. He said, "Noctis, you have the Knieves." The voice of Sun Prince did not sound human, but neither did it sound robotic. It was just strange and empty, as if it was not a person speaking but the world itself. A desolate world full of ruins. Hearing it, the sorcerer grimaced, then covered his ears. Huh? He still remembers how to speak. The thundering voice of the Colossus resounded once more, making them shiver. "Surrender the Knieves." Sunny turned his head slightly and glanced at Noctis, wondering what his reaction would be. The sorcerer, meanwhile, blinked a few times and took a big step back, distancing himself from Sunny. Then, he raised a hand, pointed a finger at him, and said with sincere confusion, What are you talking about? I don't have any knives. It's this guy over here. He has them. So if you want them, come and take them from him. Leave this poor sorcerer out of this. By the moon. Chapter 707, Treachery. Sunny froze in place, dumbfounded, and just stood still for a moment. Surrounded by stunned silence, all he could hear was the wild beating of his heart and the hum of blood rushing in his ears. His eye twitched. No way the bastard just did this to me. As all four of his shadows wrapped themselves around his body, Sunny turned his head slightly and stared at the sorcerer's finger, which was, without a shadow of a doubt, pointing straight at his broad back. His mouth turned dry. He did. What the hell was Noctis thinking? No, the sorcerer would not have sold him out. Yes, shifting the blame on Sunny had to be a con of some sort, but what would Noctis achieve by doing this? Nothing. Unless, of course, unless this had been his plan all along. A cold, sickening feeling suddenly grasped Sunny's heart. High above him, the gaze of the dreadful Colossus slowly shifted from the elegant figure of the sorcerer to the four-armed devil standing by his side. The weight of that gaze pressed down on Sunny, making him bare his teeth in a snarl. It felt as if he was being pierced by it, his very soul laid bare. And somewhere within his soul, locked inside the covetous coffer, were the three knives. One made of obsidian, one made of glass, one made of blood-red ruby. Something changed about the terrifying presence of Sun Prince, and his deafening voice resounded once again, now suffused by a distant, pale echo of a vague emotion. Shadow. Sunny paled. He had forgotten that the master of the original shadow spawn was to blame for what happened to the Prince of the Ivory City as well. In fact, one could even say that Shadow Lord was the main culprit of the 100 years of harrowing torture that Sun Prince endured. He had stolen the Ember Knife after all. So, if the Steel Colossus had a reason to really hate someone, curses. Feeling his hearts turn cold, Sunny silently watched as the Colossus shifted his weight, then bent slightly, preparing to reach down with his giant steel hand. He was desperately trying to calculate his chances of escaping this situation alive. At that moment, Noctis suddenly cleared his throat and then addressed Sun Prince in a friendly tone. Oh, but do be careful. You know how tricky shadows are, my friend? This one in particular is full of treachery, vileness, and unspeakable malice. The beast even slaughtered a temple full of innocent maidens. He also tried to poison me. Oh, the villainy. So, be careful when you grab him. Or you just might lose your hand. A low growl escaped from Sunny's mouth. He could feel the other members of the cohort grow tense and ready to fight. Cassie's hand fell on the hilt of the quiet dancer, and Kai outstretched his arm ready to summon his bow. Effie was staring up with a somber expression on her childish face, her body drawn like a spring. But what were they supposed to do? Even if Sunny knew which of the three knives was meant for Sun Prince, how could he thrust it into the Transcendent's flesh? The actual body of the Chain Lord was buried somewhere inside the walking mountain of steel. More than that, using the knife would only make him mortal. After that, he would still have to be killed somehow. Killing a saint was no easy task. As the Colossus leaned down and moved his hand to reach inside the moondeal, Sunny was thinking feverishly. He saw only one option: to run away as fast as he could. Using Shadow Step, he would be able to dodge at least. But for how long would he be able to outrun the giant? Sunny had seen him breach the gap between two islands with one jump. Now that the range of shadow control had grown, Sunny could possibly do the same. The difference was that a single jump like that was going to drain all his essence, while Sun Prince would be able to pursue him indefinitely, tireless and inescapable like death itself. Damn. The world suddenly grew darker, the sun obstructed by a giant palm. It was open, descending from above like a vast plain of gray steel. It was as though the sky itself was falling on his head. Effie took a step back and hissed, "Sunny, what do we do?" Frozen in place, he hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Nothing. Don't do anything. Don't move." There was no point in trying to fight Sun Prince, or even running away. Because, As the steel colossus leaned over the outer ring of the ancient moondial, the tall pillars shone with ethereal light, suddenly flooded with a mind-boggling amount of soul essence. A myriad of runes revealed themselves, carved in a vast circle that encompassed the whole structure. And then, everything around them turned to light. Cold, pale light of the moon. Blinded by it, Sonny didn't see what happened next, and just felt something vast and chilling, and yet intangible, move past him with stunning speed. Then, he heard the thunder of a deafening impact, and the groan of steel that was being torn apart. The whole island shook, the quake throwing him to the ground. Sonny hit the cold stones and sensed the shadow of Sun Prince changing. As the pale moonlight dimmed and was extinguished, he saw a shocking sight. The moondial lay broken, the pillars shattered and toppled over. Not too far away from him, a giant steel hand rested on the ground. However, it was not attached to the body of the colossus anymore. The giant was staggering back, his right arm torn at the shoulder. A river of molten metal was flowing from the terrible wound, falling down like blood. The grass was turning to ash where it fell. And amidst all of this, unperturbed, stood Noctis. The sorcerer's expression was calm and slightly amused. Staring at all the chaos, he flicked a speck of dust off his silk garments, shook his head, and said, "Tisk, have I not warned him to be careful? I did, didn't I? By the moon, why does no one listen to me? I am the wisest man in all of Kingdom of Hope, after all." Chapter 708, Crimson Beast of Twilight. The colossus staggered back, swayed, and then moved his foot to balance himself. The island quaked once more, and the giant grew still, bent slightly and grasping the gaping wound with his one remaining hand. His head turned, staring at Noctis, with the same empty, unmoving expression. However, his polished steel eyes, which had been burning with the blinding reflections of the sun, became submerged in deep shadow. For a moment, there was silence. Sonny gritted his teeth, then slowly exhaled and raised a hand to wipe the sweat off his brow. After the initial panic of being sold out by Noctis, he had forced himself to calm down and think. It was then that Sonny had realized that they were not in real danger and told his friends to stand down. The immortal sorcerer was many things, including a liar and a cheat. Sonny did not doubt that Noctis had lied to him on many occasions and about many things, sometimes for a specific purpose, and sometimes simply for the fun of it. However, one thing that Noctis was not was a fool. Sonny could imagine many situations in which the immortal would betray and damn him to death, but not without a good reason. And surrendering the cohort to Sun Prince was the opposite of what Noctis wanted to achieve. At best, it would have bought him some time, at the expense of losing the 3 knives to the other chain lords. One thing that Sonny did not doubt was the sincerity of the sorcerer's desire to free Hope. And so, he had understood that the immortal's sudden betrayal was just another deception. It had not been hard to guess what the purpose of the deception was as well. After all, Sonny had already guessed how the fateful meeting between rebellious Noctis and the Herald of the Chain Lords was going to end, and how the Iron Hand Island would get its name. Sun Prince had walked right into the sorcerer's trap, and Sonny had been used as bait. Not for the first time, and probably not for the last. So, he wasn't very shocked by the sight of the giant's missing arm, and of the streams of molten steel that flowed out of it, slowly cooling on the broken stones, or at least he wasn't supposed to be. In reality, the scene in front of him was so striking, so tremendous that it was simply impossible to remain untouched by the vast and poignant scale of it. Still, he turned to Noctis, remained silent for a moment, and then let out a low growl. "You could have warned me, you know." The sorcerer looked at him with sincere confusion. Then he smiled and said, But what if I changed my mind at the last moment? Then warning you would have made me a liar. I have a reputation to uphold, don't I?" With that, Noctis winked at him, then turned to face the motionless colossus. As Sonny stared at him darkly, the smile slowly disappeared from the sorcerer's face, making way for something cold and frightening. His gray eyes shone with distant moonlight, and in that moonlight there was madness. Taking a step forward, Noctis suddenly appeared to be taller than he had been, his previously contained presence spreading over the world like a flood. Sonny shivered, feeling, feeling like prey being stalked by a hungry predator. The air suddenly seemed to smell of blood. The light of the sun appeared slightly dimmer, and in the echoing silence, they could almost hear the howls of countless beasts. Even though Sunny knew and somewhat trusted Noctis, he suddenly felt scared. And he wasn't even the focus of the immortal's furious gaze. Instead, it was aimed at the hunched colossus. The sorcerer grinned, revealing his canines, and spoke, his clear voice flowing across the island like a river of blood. "Surrender the knives? Ah, I don't think so. My old friend, if I do, how will I kill you and your vile brother?" He laughed, and then took another step forward, raising his hand. A toppled pillar that blocked his path exploded into a rain of shards and stone dust, obliterated in a split second. "And that is what I intend to do. You, Severus, Solvain, I'll kill you all, break the chains that bind the demon of desire, and set her free." Noctis took another step, and then stopped, staring at Sun Prince with ruthless determination. "So, if you want to take the knives, you'll have to take them off my cold corpse." "Oh, wait. You can't. I am immortal." He threw his head back and laughed again. This time, the sorcerer's laughter did not seem carefree and infectious. Instead, it was chilling and full of madness. The steel colossus looked at him from above, unmoving. His face was motionless and unexpressive, like that of a statue. However, it seemed as though the shadows veiling his eyes grew even deeper. Noctis shook his head, and then said with disdain, "Oh, but you can try, of course. Go back. Go back and return with the Sun Legion, with the Dragon Sevirax, with the warriors of the Red Colosseum, with Solvain. You know where to find me, and I'll be waiting to welcome you." The giant continued to stare at him for a while, the molten steel flowing between his fingers. Sunny held his breath, not knowing what was going to happen next. Then, Sun Prince straightened, turned around, and walked away, making the island shake with each step. He reached the edge of it, stepped down on the heavenly chain, and continued walking, somehow keeping perfect balance. The chain was colossal in its own right, and yet the giant made it seem like a thin rope being traversed by a rope walker. Soon he reached the neighboring island, climbed on it, and disappeared from sight. Only the rattling of chains and the tremors running through the ground from time to time reminded them of his visit. Well, that, and the giant hand laying not too far away from them. Sunny studied it for a while, then walked over to Noctis and asked, his voice low and cautious. Not to complain, but why let him go? Wouldn't it be easier to kill him right here and now? We won't get another chance to catch him alone, most likely, and judging by how easily you took his arm off. Noctis did not respond immediately. Instead, he slowly turned his head, looked at Sunny coldly, and then gracelessly fell on his butt, his face pale, his chest rising and falling wildly, and his breath hoarse and labored. The sorcerer cursed, looking as if he was about to vomit. "Easily? Are you insane? I am at my weakest during the day, remember, and that strike gods. I spent several centuries infusing this shrine with moonlight. Do you think there's another one just laying around nearby? Just be happy he believed my bluff. Otherwise, things might have turned really ugly really fast for us." Sunny stared at the sorcerer with wide eyes for several long moments, then shook his head and sighed. "Lunatic, you damned lunatic by the moon, I take it back. You are a fool." Chapter 709, Nature of the Beast. It was only later, when they returned to the flying ship and looked down upon the devastation that the short and furious clash between Noctis and Sun Prince had created, did the understanding of what had happened finally settled in their minds. There was no going back now. The War of Immortals had finally started. Soon, the whole of the Kingdom of Hope was going to be turned into a battlefield and drowned in blood by its frenzy. And then, the repercussions of that madness were going to spread outward like a tidal wave, changing the world forever. Looking down, Sunny couldn't help but shiver. The broken pillars, the severed hand of a giant, the ash swirling in the air, this place, this event, this moment in time. Was that the spark that would eventually ignite another, much more terrifying war? A war between gods and demons, one that would destroy them all and bring about the end of the world, the war to end all wars. He still suspected that it was the unchaining of the demon of desire that had set it in motion. Looking down, Sunny silently whispered, "But then came desire, and with it came direction." Turning his head slightly, he looked at Noctis, the person who had started it all. The sorcerer seemed calm and without a worry in the world. His beautiful face was pale with exhaustion. But other than that, he did not look too different from his usual self, not at all like a person who had potentially ushered in the obliterating apocalypse. Did he not understand the consequences of his actions? Or did he understand them far better than Sunny ever could? With a sigh, Sunny threw one last glance at the Iron Hand Island, now truly and once again deserving of its name, and walked to sit beneath the branches of the sacred tree. Despite the fact that he had not done much, he felt exhausted too. And there was a lot he had to think about. On the way back, Sunny remembered the future. He had been to the Iron Hand Island many times, had seen the toppled pillars and the severed arm of a giant, and had even sketched and described them in detail for an exploration report. And now, he had witnessed how the island came to be in that state. Another event from the distant past had repeated itself inside the nightmare almost to a T. Sunny had already formed a theory that fate was like a current, always pulling things toward an inescapable conclusion. After the destruction of the Temple of the Chalice, the details could be changed, but the result seemed to always be the same. The events that had transpired on the Iron Hand Island only cemented that theory. By all accounts, the appearance of the cohort and Mordred should have drastically changed the flow of history in the Kingdom of Hope. They had accelerated the start of the war, and even slain one of the Chain Lords. If not for them, Noctis would have most likely spent several years searching for a way to make a deal with Weaver, and only then rebelled against the other immortals. Those several years were, perhaps, the countdown to the blossoming of the Nightmare Seed. If no Awakened appeared to challenge the nightmare by then, the seed would have bloomed. Was that the logic? Seeds blossomed when the conflict inside them resolved itself and fate repeated unchanged. Before, Sunny had thought that the task of the challenger was to resolve a conflict that would have otherwise remained unresolved. But now, knowing what he knew about the Chained Islands and the Kingdom of Hope, he realized that he had been wrong. With or without his help, Noctis was always going to start a war. The Ivory Tower was always going to break free from its chains. The Temple of the Chalice was always going to be destroyed, and Sun Prince was always going to lose his hand to the enchanted Moondeal. Come to think of it, his first nightmare would have resolved itself without his intervention, too, one way or another. The nameless temple slave would have probably died, and Oro of the Nine would have survived. Or would they? In any case, there would have been an ending. That doesn't really make sense. So what was the role of the challengers? If the conflict could resolve itself, why were they here? What did the spell want from them? Prove that they were equal to the heroes of the past. Do it better than them. Simply survive. The spell did not care what one did inside the nightmare and how they went about solving the conflict. The reward was going to be the same. Either way, the challenger would ascend to a new rank. They could receive a true name, or even in extremely rare cases, an evolution of their aspect, but those things could be done outside a nightmare as well. The only thing the spell cared about was that the challenger survived until the end. But that was not entirely true. The spell would not give additional rewards or deny the survivor their ascension. However, it did care a little, at least enough to appraise the challenger's performance. The appraisal did not really matter outside of the first nightmare, where it was tied to the boon, but the spell still gave them out each time. Good, exceptional, remarkable, glorious, and so on. Was there a hint in there somewhere about what it wanted? If so, Sunny had apparently pleased the spell very much in his first trial. Sitting in the shade of the sacred tree, he sighed and looked into the distance with a solemn expression. I hope it will be pleased with us again. This time, I hope we survive. Soon the flying ship returned to the sanctuary and descended to its usual position above the altar island. As they returned to the ground, Sunny could see hundreds of faces turned to them, fear and uncertainty written in their lines. The inhabitants of the sanctuary had not seen the clash between Noctis and Sun Prince, but they all knew that something was wrong. By now the island had stopped trembling, but their hearts did not. Without paying them any attention, the sorcerer tiredly landed on the grass, then turned to Sunny and frowned slightly. I am going to rest for a couple of days. That most of the Sun Legion, as well as the army of the Red Colosseum, are arrayed along the border between Solvain's territory and that of the Ivory City. It is going to take them at least 2 weeks to assemble together and march east, so we will give them enough time to break the current formation, but not enough to build a new one. We attack in 7 days. He hesitated for a few moments, and then suddenly smiled. Warmongers and the Sun Legion forgetting their hatred and fighting side by side. Truly, no one but me could have made it happen. Am I not the most talented diplomat in all of the Kingdom of Hope? With that, Noctis laughed, turned around, and walked away. Sunny stared at his back for a few moments, then sighed, and said quietly, "You are definitely not. But then again, maybe you are." Chapter 710 Departure. The next morning, Sunny woke up in a strange mood. Knowing that they were nearing the end of the nightmare, and perhaps their own, he had expected himself to be consumed by somber trepidation. But surprisingly, Sunny felt fine. It was as though the scope of the approaching battle was simply too large to be evaluated, and so his mind had not bothered with it at all. Instead, he had practical problems he needed to solve. Sunny still did not feel completely comfortable in his new body. He barely had any time to get accustomed to its size and weight, after all. The next several days were going to be crucial in that regard. His previous garments had been torn when he evolved, and so Sunny summoned the puppeteer's shroud to wrap itself around his towering body. Although not as powerful as his other suits of armor, the shroud was much more comfortable. It was a bit nostalgic to wear the light armor once again, but also a bit sad to see it relegated to serving as a bona fide training suit. Remembering how he had planned to slaughter countless dormant nightmare creatures while being invulnerable thanks to his new, incredible awakened armor of the 5th tier just a few years ago, Sunny smiled wistfully and walked out of his room. The sanctuary seemed different somehow. The ring of giant menhirs was the same, and so was the beautiful garden. However, the people living in the ancient shrine had changed. They were hurried and full of fear, moving with panicked speed and feverish determination. Sunny noticed a few familiar faces. The old woman he had seen on his first day here was standing alone, a lost look on her face. The young woman was carrying the frightened child in her hands and a heavy pack on her back. The kind man with a neatly trimmed beard was gritting his teeth, his hand resting on the worn hilt of his sword. He sighed and looked away. An immortal transcendent had started this war to free a daemon from a prison built by a god. But these little people were the ones that were going to suffer the most as the result. In fact, they had been the ones to suffer the most throughout all of this, from the destruction of the Kingdom of Hope, to the madness she had cursed this land with, to now. He had been one of the little people himself once. Now, he was a devil destroying their lives. Sunny remained motionless for a few moments, then looked up at the sound of steps approaching him. He saw Effie and Kai, both wearing their armors and packs, as though ready to go on a long hunt. He raised his eyebrows. Going somewhere? The little girl glanced at the masked cripple and then shrugged. Kai, meanwhile, smiled even though Sunny could not see his face. He could tell by his eyes. He could also tell that the smile was tinted with sadness. The archer simply nodded. "Yes, we are leaving." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "Not for long, of course. We will be back before the week is over. You see, the sanctuary, it was a shelter for those who wanted to find peace in this land of madness. But now that Noctis started a war, and both the Sun Legion and the Warmongers are marching to raze it to the ground, that shelter is no more." Effie shook her head, then sighed. "The West belongs to the warring cults of War and Sun. The South is abandoned and overtaken by nightmare creatures. The North, well, you know. These poor fools have nowhere else to go. So we are going to guide them to one of the great chains and help them cross to the other side, and leave the Kingdom of Hope behind, forever." She scratched the back of her head, then said thoughtfully, "Actually, we are not even sure if the nightmare goes that far. Maybe there's nothing out there beyond the chained island. And yes, we know that these people are not even real. Still, we thought that we'd at least try." Cassie even went and convinced Noctis to lend her the ship, to help transport them. Sunny stared at her, surprised. The little girl raised her chin. "What?" "I know that it's stupid. People need to do stupid things sometimes, you know?" He slowly shook his head. No. Actually, I don't think that it's stupid at all. It's just the three of you are going, so why didn't you invite me as well? Effie grinned. You have stuff to do. How are you going to get used to that lanky body of yours while babysitting a bunch of refugees? So don't be lazy and get that stone girlfriend of yours to beat you black and blue while we are gone. We have a date with 2 whole armies in a week's time, remember? Sunny made a sour face, then looked away. Believe me, I remember. I'm going to train hard. Kai gripped his shoulder for a moment. Well, the top of one of his lower arms that were in reach anyway, and then the two walked away without saying anything else. There was no need to say goodbye. With them gone, Sunny suddenly felt a bit lost. Shaking his head, he threw stupid thoughts out of his head and walked to the center of the garden, intending to spend the rest of the day practicing with the cruel sight. Saint would have probably healed enough to be summoned too, so he had his work cut out for him. Finding a secluded spot near the clear lake, Sunny went through the intense set of steps and exercises that he had developed to condition his body for the shadow dance. Of course, that had been in his human body. The shadow spawn, meanwhile, was a very different beast, or rather devil. Despite its size, the gaunt body of the devil was incredibly nimble and swift. It was also capable of bursts of monstrous, explosive strength that would leave many people stunned. In addition, it was itself a weapon. With his talons, claws, fangs, and horns, Sunny was capable of delivering a lot of damage even unarmed. He could even kill things with the spike at the end of his tail. After that initial practice session, he summoned Saint and started the real training. As they sparred, Sunny observed the departure of the inhabitants of the sanctuary. They left in a column, with Kai in the front and Effie walking behind. Some were carrying their meager belongings, while some were empty-handed. Some cried, while some remained silent and stoic. Some even smiled. Above them the flying ship moved, carrying those who could not walk. Sunny could not see, but knew that Cassie was controlling it. For a moment he was curious about how she was able to communicate with the sailor dolls. However, that short distraction cost him dearly, when Saint delivered a painful blow to his abdomen, and so Sunny decided to concentrate on himself. Turning his full attention back to the training fight, he thought, I wish them well even if they are not real. I wish them all the best. Long hours passed in arduous training. Slowly but surely, he was growing accustomed to the new proportions of his strange and powerful body. His height, his reach, his might, all of it was starting to click, making him feel confident in his own skin once more. At some point, dead tired, Sunny decided to take a break. Commanding Saint to stand down, he crouched near the lake and drew some water to wash the sweat off his face. Then, he poured some on his head and sighed, looking at the clear surface of the lake. The graceful figure of Saint reflected on it, and near her his own obsidian skin, bestial features, eyes that seemed like pools of liquid darkness. Twisting Horn's Master Jet had once joked that he would be a flower boy one day. Remembering it, Sunny smiled. I wonder what she would have said if she saw me that way. And then, he froze. His sweat turned cold. There was a third reflection on the surface of the lake. It was a tall and slender young man, with pale skin and raven-black hair. His face was sharp and thin, not exactly handsome, but at the same time charming and strangely beautiful. His striking eyes didn't seem to possess a color of their own, and instead reflected the world back on itself like two pools of liquid silver. Currently they were as blue as the boundless, vast sky. The young man smiled pleasantly, and then raised a hand in greeting. A painfully familiar voice suddenly resounded in Sunny's mind. Ah, Sunless, how nice it is to meet you again, after all this time. Just look at you, goodness. I almost failed to recognize you behind that fearsome face. Chapter 711. A Simple Task. Hearing Mordred's pleasant voice reminded Sunny of the time they had shared in the sky below, and the closeness that had existed between them back then. A long time ago, he had considered the mysterious prince, if not a friend, then at least an ally. He had been fond of the owner of the disembodied voice enough to worry when it disappeared. Of course, all of that had been a lie. A masterfully crafted net of deception that Mordred had created to lure Sunny into bringing the mirror shard into the Night Temple and setting him free. The memory of the dark conclusion of that story, the fear, The pain, the shame of having been led astray and betrayed, the slaughter gripped his hearts with icy claws. Sonny glared at the reflection of the young man for a few moments, then gritted his teeth. He hated to admit it, but there was no escaping the fact that he feared Mordred. Sonny had met many powerful men and even more terrifying abominations, but the Prince of Nothing was perhaps the only one whom he was truly scared of, not because of the divine aspect or the lineage of war, but precisely because of how insidiously cunning and inexplicable the Prince of Nothing was. It was like what teacher Julius had said, what humans feared the most was the unknown. And no matter how many times Sonny tried, he simply could not understand how Mordred thought, what his motives were, and what was he scheming behind that friendly smile. Because of the eerie wrongness hiding in the depths of his eyes, the Prince of Nothing was impossible to predict. Hell, he was even impossible to kill. The whole of the great clan Valor had tried and failed. Grasping the extraordinary rock, Sonny made sure that there was no one really standing behind him and addressed the reflection in a gruff voice. "Oh, it's you. What are you doing inside the lake? Don't be a stranger, Mordred. Come, enter my soul sea, and let's talk face to face." The reflection of the young man lingered, its smile turning a little forced. Then it spoke again. "How strange. I can hear you speak, but I don't see your lips moving. Have you been learning new tricks, Sunless?" "Ah, good for you. I've been doing some of that myself." Sonny scowled, shadows veiling his eyes. I've heard. A whole region of the kingdom, Mordred? Really? I thought you did not enjoy killing innocent people. Or did you tell yourself that it was all right because they were not real?" Mordred tilted his head a little. Then he said with the same pleasant smile, "What would have been the point of killing them if they were not real?" Hearing that, Sonny shivered. The reflection, meanwhile, shook its head. "They were real enough to serve a purpose. Don't get me wrong, however. I would not have done the same in the waking world. Those I killed were all already dead, sunless. All of them were doomed, and uselessly so. I simply gave their deaths a different meaning." Mordred did not seem pleased with himself, but neither did he seem remorseful about slaughtering thousands of people. Just uncaring, which was much more unnerving. The Prince of Nothing looked at Sonny and chuckled. "So, that little oracle of yours told you all about my adventures then? Well, wonderful. I will not have to describe them myself. Time is of the essence. After all, sending a reflection across such a distance is not easy, even for me." Sonny lingered for a few moments, then sighed and crossed his forearms. "She did, even if I would not have used the word adventures to describe it. What do you want, Mordred?" The reflection remained silent for a bit, then smiled. "Why, what else?" "To conquer the nightmare, of course. Don't you?" A low growl escaped from Sonny's mouth. "I do. Stop playing games and just tell me what it is that you want from me." Mordred sighed. "Well, if you insist. What I want is rather simple, which is not to say easy. I want you to keep Noctis alive, at all costs." Sonny blinked. What is he trying to make me do? Does he really want me to protect Noctis, or is he hoping that I will do the opposite of what he wants, and kill Noctis instead? Why would he want Noctis dead before the war even started? No, wait, maybe he really does want Noctis to live arg. Damned Mordred, I hate that lying bastard. He stared at the reflection with a dark expression, and then said evenly, "Is that all?" The Prince of Nothing smiled. "Yes, that is all. If you can accomplish this simple task, I can guarantee that we will conquer the nightmare and escape it alive." Sonny snorted. "You can guarantee it, can you? How? What are you planning? What about Hope? Will you try to free her? Or have you found a way to restore her prison to its original state?" A gust of wind suddenly disturbed the surface of the lake, and the reflection of the banished prince became distorted, swaying with the water. He spoke again, his voice sounding a little distant. "Ah, how inconvenient. It seems that I have run out of essence until we meet again, Sunless." Sonny clenched his fists. "This again, disappearing just when you have to answer a question, bastard. You do understand that we are on the same side right now? We can kill each other after we ascend, but first we need to survive the nightmare." Mordred laughed, his voice growing ethereal and almost inaudible. Not a bastard. Ah, I wish I was. With that, he was gone. The reflection disappeared from the surface of the lake, and Sonny was left alone once more. He glared at the clear water for some time, then grimaced. A simple task, as if anyone can keep up with that lunatic, let alone keep him alive. With that, he gritted his teeth and rose to his feet. It was time to continue his training. Time was short. Chapter 712, Leaving the Sanctuary. A few days passed. The sanctuary stood empty and silent. The beautiful garden was devoid of its usual liveliness, and the winds howled as they passed through the ring of giant menhirs. Here and there mundane things left behind by the people that had departed in a hurry lay, forlorn and forgotten. No one was ever going to return for them. Sonny had never seen the sanctuary this desolate and hollow, not in the future and not now, in the distant past. The sight of it was sad and eerie. He had spent these days training tirelessly and learning to control his new body. This latest transformation had not been as fundamental as becoming a demon after living his whole life as a human, so his progress was swift. More than that, mastery of shadow dance made Sonny especially attuned to his physicality and change. In truth, he did not need a whole week to achieve the goal, but practicing with Saint reminded him of the simpler times, and so helped him prepare himself for the battle ahead mentally. On one of the last nights he had to spend in peace, Sonny woke up suddenly, thinking that he had heard a distant scream. Had he really? Or was it just a vestige of a dream? He sat up and glanced into the window, a deep scowl appearing on his face. What dream, you fool? Awakened don't dream. But who could have screamed in the sanctuary? There were only two people left here. Sonny himself, and Noctis. He hesitated for a moment, and then stood up, summoning the puppeteer's shroud. After thinking for a bit, he also summoned the cruel sight, wrapped his shadows around himself, and walked outside. The full moon shone in the night sky, drowning the world in ghostly blue light. Guided by it, Sonny walked across the empty garden and approached the residence of the sorcerer, where the immortal had disappeared 2 days earlier and never came back out. The door stood open, and the sailor dolls guarded it silently, their wooden faces devoid of any sign of worry. Passing between them, Sonny entered the residence and studied the familiar chamber. It had changed slightly, the stone floor was even more broken and littered with deep cracks. The piles of shards had grown taller. However, there were no tremors running through it from time to time anymore, as if whatever it was that had hidden beneath had either died, fallen into a slumber, or gone elsewhere. Noctis was in the middle of the room, sitting on a pile of rubble with a pained look on his face. The sorcerer looked unwell. His skin was deathly pale, with dark circles under his eyes. His lustrous hair had grown dull and was disheveled. Even his elegant garments, which had always been flashy and immaculate, were now wrinkled and in disarray. What's more, Sonny could have sworn that there was something moving beneath the sorcerer's skin. It appeared for a moment, and then was gone, making him unsure if he had seen it or just imagined the whole thing. Noticing his presence, Noctis slowly turned his head and smiled weakly. Ah, Sunless, you are just in time. How do I look? Sonny stared at him for a moment and then said, You look like crap. The sorcerer blinked a couple of times, then threw a hurt look at him. No, not me, you idiot. How does he look? With that, Noctis gestured at a sailor doll that stood motionlessly a few steps away. Sonny had grown so accustomed to the silent mannequins that he did not pay the doll any attention after registering its presence and position. Now, he took a closer look and raised his eyebrows, confused by what he saw. The sailor doll was about the same height as Noctis, dressed in his best silks, and wearing a gorgeous black wig. It stared senselessly in front of itself and held a glass of wine. He tilted his head, opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. What the hell? The sorcerer shrugged. Well, we are going to unexpectedly attack the Ivory City, are we not? Surely the other chain lords would notice if I suddenly disappear from the sanctuary, so I prepared this doll to make it seem like I'm still here. He smiled proudly and looked at Sonny with a glint in his eyes. Sunny covered his face with a palm for a moment. Do you really think that this thing will fool anyone? Have you lost your mind? I mean, lost it even more? Noctis glanced at him in confusion, and then laughed. Oh, I forgot the last touch. With that, he raised his hands and clapped them a couple of times. A moment later, there were two sorcerers in the chamber, one sitting on the pile of rubble, the other standing a few meters away and staring at Sunny with an obnoxious smile. Even though he knew that the second one was just a sailor doll, he couldn't tell the difference. How about now? Sunny gulped. Yeah, it looks fine. The sailor doll remained motionless for a bit, then raised the glass of wine to its lips, pretending to drink. The likeness was uncanny, but more than that, Sunny could feel that the real enchantment went much deeper than just looks. He could actually feel a suffocating presence radiating from the mannequin, similar to what he had felt on the Iron Hand Island from Noctis himself. Looking beneath the surface of the sailor doll, he was stunned to see something that looked exactly like a transcendent soul core burning in its chest. Sunny slowly inhaled. If Cassie were to look at the mannequin, would she have seen an aspect name and a list of attributes? Better than fine. It is very convincing. Noctis grinned, then rose to his feet with a grimace. Once again, it seemed as if something moved under his skin, but a second later, he seemed fine. Good. Well then, one last thing left to do before we leave. Follow me. Sunny threw one last look at the broken floor of the stone chamber, and then turned around. He knew that he would never return here again. Together, the two of them entered the garden and walked across it. Sunny did not know where Noctis was leading him, but felt that it was important. One of the sailor dolls followed them, carrying something heavy. As they walked, the sorcerer suddenly spoke. I thought a lot about what you have told me, Sunless, about wanting to return home. Sunny glanced at him with surprise, but did not say anything. Noctis remained silent for a few moments, and then said in a wistful tone, I used to have a home too, you know. A long time ago. There was a beautiful temple where my siblings and I grew up, being taught by priests and priestesses. It was surrounded by a vast forest where we played and hunted. There was a lake where we caught fish and swam to escape the summer's heat, without a care in the world. The smile slowly disappeared from his face, and his eyes shone softly, reflecting the pale moonlight. I returned to that place some time ago. But it was not. It changed. The temple lay in ruins. The forest had been chopped down. The lake had dried up. Everything felt unfamiliar and strange, like a distant dream. And for a moment I felt as if my whole life was just a dream that I have dreamt, and maybe was dreaming still. He paused, sighed heavily, then suddenly smiled and looked at Sunny. But hey, by then, I already had this sanctuary that I have built with my own two hands, the people that I saved, the land that I tried to protect, the duty I made mine to uphold. This was my home. He inhaled deeply and looked around, enjoying the sight of the sanctuary. Sunny suddenly realized that the sorcerer was perhaps seeing it for the last time. His face grew heavy. After a few moments, Noctis said, What I am trying to say, Sunless, is that you don't need to belong somewhere or to something. You just need to make something belong to you. That is how you can find home. The sorcerer hesitated, and then added with a proud look on his face, I mean it as a metaphor, of course. Sunny looked at him for a long time, then smiled. That was a great metaphor. Noctis grinned. It was, wasn't it? Well, why wouldn't it be? I am the most learned man in all of the Kingdom of Hope, after all. At that moment, they passed between the menhirs and approached the edge of the island, where the ugly monstrosities that Noctis had called statues of him stood. There were 14 of them, each at least twice as tall as Sunny and cut of solid marble. He had not looked at the fruits of the sorcerer's labor after that first time, and was momentarily disturbed. If the first statue could have been remotely called an image of a person, the rest of them, without a doubt, resembled terrifying abominations much more. They were giant and heavy, with talons, claws, fangs, spikes, and horns that made Sunny's own look pathetic in comparison. The giant gargoyles looked frightening, unsightly, ferocious. And each had mighty stone wings. Surrounded by monuments of harrowing creatures, He suddenly felt small and weak, feeling uneasy. Sunny glanced at Noctis and asked, "These are statues of you?" The sorcerer laughed. "Oh, well, I might have lied a little. These were never meant to look like me." With that, a sailor doll silently appeared from the darkness, carrying a heavy box that was wrapped in thick, heavy chains. As soon as Sunny saw the box, he felt his heart turn cold, and muffled whispers invade his ears. Involuntarily, he took a step back. "What the hell is in that thing?" Noctis calmly took the box, which trembled slightly, as if something inside was trying to break free. At the same time, Sunny thought that he noticed a movement under the sorcerer's skin. The immortal grimaced, and then said, "Souls. A few especially vile souls that I have collected across the centuries." Sunny scowled, gripping the cruel sight tighter. "And what, exactly, are you planning to do with these souls?" Noctis glanced at him, smiled, and then easily tore the heavy chains, keeping the box shut. "What else? I am going to create a few little helpers for you and your strange friends." "What? Were you really going to take on the armies of the Ivory City and the Red Colosseum all by yourself? By the moon, Sunless, I do trust in your abilities, but what would people say if I turned out to be the only chain lord without an army? How would that look? Ah, no. Such an embarrassment would simply not do." With that, he opened the box, his eyes shining with cold moonlight, and in the next moment, the 14 terrifying stone beasts suddenly moved. Chapter 713 War Drums. The flying ship was moving through the deep darkness of the sky below, escorted by 14 stone fiends. With the ocean of flames burning below and vast nothingness above, it seemed as though they were sailing through purgatory. Noctis stood at the steering oars, slouched with a pale face and dark circles under his eyes. He did not seem to be doing too well, but his hand was steady as it controlled the ship. On the upper deck, the sailor dolls were preparing for battle. They were moving wooden ballistae into position and loading heavy bolts into them, with an especially fearsome siege engine placed at the bow. The bolts themselves were not that simple either. Their surfaces were carved with runes, which shimmered with stored soul essence and brimmed with power. The mannequins themselves were armed as well, their elegant liveries replaced with chainmail. They carried heavy bows, sabers, and hatchets, both to kill the enemies and defend the ship from boarding hooks. There were plenty of quivers full of arrows around, as well as barrels of water to douse the flames should the sails catch on fire. The sails, meanwhile, were turned at a strange angle to catch the hot air rising from below, surrounding the vessel from the sides like wings. The ship was flying swiftly, but in the emptiness of the sky below, it was hard to measure how much distance they were covering. Sunny could only tell that their speed was tremendous because of the powerful torrent of essence flowing through the ancient wood and the howling of the wind that was being cut by the armored ram of the ship. At this rate, they were going to reach the Ivory City soon. The cohort was preparing for battle too. Kai had summoned his white and gold armor, a memory he had earned while commanding a centuria of the Sun Legion. Behind the charred wooden mask, his eyes were serious and focused. He was examining the fletching of arrows in his quiver, a mighty bow resting at his feet. This bow had come from a champion of the war sect he had slain, and was a deadly weapon. Effie was standing nearby, leaning on the runic spear Sunny had given her. The dusk shard was propped against the board of the ship, almost as tall as the little girl, and there was a white cape that seemed to be weaved from starlight resting on her shoulders, the starlight shard, which she had received after slaying the Lord of the Dead. Of course, Effie had a whole arsenal of other memories at her disposal, those that she had collected over the years on the Forgotten Shore, and those she received for slaying countless abominations to saturate her awakened core before venturing into the seed of nightmare weapons, tools, charms. She was going to summon them when the need arose. Knowing that the battle ahead would be long and arduous, the little girl was hungrily devouring a pile of roasted meat. Cassie was quietly observing Noctis, her hand resting on the hilt of the quiet dancer. Her role in the approaching battle was going to be especially important. When the sorcerer clashed with Solvane and Sun Prince, she would have to control the flying ship and command the sailor dolls, drawing the bulk of the enemy's ire. Sunny was getting ready too. He had summoned the mantle of the underworld, which covered his demonic body like an onyx carapace. Since this battle was going to be against humans, and not mighty nightmare creatures, he had judged that its utility would be more valuable than the impregnable defense of the undying chain. There was no Elias around to heal a mortal wound should he receive one as well, so its incredible enchantment was less useful. The blood blossom rested in the onyx armor's breastplate, ready to grant him its strength. In his 4 hands he held the cruel sight, the midnight shard, and Morgan's warbow. 3 shadows rested in his soul, ready to be sent forth to destroy and slaughter. He was ready, well, as ready as he could be. Just as Sonny thought it, Noctis suddenly moved, and then looked up, a wild smile slowly appearing on his lips. His voice sounded hoarse, but clear. "Ah, they finally sensed us." The members of the cohort turned to him, their faces calm and collected. The sorcerer grinned, and then moved one of the oars, sending the ship flying up. His eyes glinted with distant moonlight. "No point in hiding anymore. We are close enough anyway. Oh, what a night to be alive, my friends." His laughter rolled across the deck as the ancient vessel climbed higher and higher, swiftly approaching the dark side of the chained island. Sonny stared up, knowing that just in a few minutes, the end of this nightmare was going to begin. As he did, Cassie silently approached him and stood nearby for a few moments, silent. Then, she said, "No matter what happens, don't let him enter the tower." Sonny frowned, looking at her with a somber expression. "Who, Noctis?" She lingered for a second, and then shook her head. "No, Mordred." Sonny smiled and turned away. Why was his guarantee of conquering the nightmare if we do as he says a lie? The young woman did not speak for a while, then said simply, "No, I don't think so." Sonny glanced at her and raised an eyebrow. "Why should I try to stop him then?" She hesitated for a moment. Then Cassie asked, "What happens after the nightmare?" Sonny sighed, then chuckled wryly. "All right, I'll take your request into consideration." He could already see the dark underbelly of the Kingdom of Hope above them, and hear the distant whisper of war drums. Caught by surprise, the 2 armies were hurriedly preparing to meet them. Looking at his friends, Sonny sighed, and then said in a neutral voice, "I guess this is it. Good luck, guys. Don't die out there." Kai and Effie looked at him, and then nodded. The little girl smiled crookedly. "Why would we die? It's just a couple of armies and 3 transcendents. No big deal." She hesitated for a bit, and then added in a somber tone, "However, let's make a promise to not do suicidal battles beneath giant towers again. Okay? I mean, at this rate, it might become a habit." Sonny looked at her and grinned. "So, what next time? We should do battle on top of a giant tower." Effie sighed. "No, no towers. Let's try to avoid giant towers in the future entirely. How does that sound?" Sonny laughed, then turned away and stared at the approaching islands. "Sounds fine to me. Can't promise anything, though." Chapter 714, Dreadnought. As the silver circle of the full moon reached the highest point in the sky, a sudden movement tore through the darkness of the night. In the clamor of drums and human voices, an armada of wooden ships flew forward, each vessel illuminated by the orange flame of lanterns. Some had red sails, and some had white. In the pale moonlight, all of them looked gray and colorless. The ships rushed forward, seeming like a river of lights. On their decks, human figures moved, feverishly preparing for battle. The soldiers were drawing their weapons and knocking arrows on the strings of their bows, while the captains stared at the radiant moon, their faces tense and grim. Soon, a lonesome black dot appeared on the surface of the silver disk, and then slowly grew as it drew closer. A single ship, this one much larger and more graceful than the rest of them, was fearlessly flying to meet the luminous armada. There was a beautiful tree growing around its mast, and a man with pale skin and raven-black hair standing at the oar, guiding the vessel forward. His eyes were gray and clear, shining with the reflected light of the moon. Standing near Noctis, Sonny could not help but feel a dark resentment grip his heart. Curse it! They had chosen the time of the attack to catch the armies of the Chain Lords unprepared. Most of the soldiers were still on march to the Ivory City, their formation broken and in disarray. It was not easy to unite two large forces, and Noctis had chosen the precise moment when the chaos was at its worst to stage his assault. And yet, there was still a considerable force ready to defend the city. At least 100 ships rose into the air to intercept and destroy them, each carrying dozens of warriors, some of them awakened, and some even ascended, but all the absolute elite the warring factions had to offer. And somewhere out there, two immortal transcendents were waiting to take their turn. That is what Noctis and the cohort were up against. Sunny lingered for a moment, and then glanced past the approaching river of lights at the distant shapes of the Ivory City. It was as beautiful during the night as it was during the day. The graceful arches of the tall aqueducts, the aerial bridges that connected the islands, the buildings made of white stone. The streets of the city were empty, but he could feel thousands of frightened souls trembling behind the walls that they had considered solid and safe, not knowing what calamity he and his friends were bringing to their doorstep. Suddenly grim, he had to remind himself that these were the people that had tried to sacrifice Kai to satiate a dragon's hunger, and then burned him alive for daring to survive. And the dragon himself was there too, powerless for now, at least until the dawn came. Gritting his teeth, he took a step forward and closed his eyes for a moment. Just 100 ships. What is there to fear? I just have to bring 10 or 20 down. Maybe kill a few ascendants. Big deal. The armada was already close enough to make out the distant shapes of humans rushing on the decks. A gust of wind brought with it a chorus of voices. Sunny shuddered, recognizing the familiar chant. Glory, 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 glory. He opened his lightless eyes, all doubt and remorse disappearing from them, leaving behind only the cold will to kill. Somewhere behind him, Noctis suddenly grinned, and then whispered in a hoarse voice, "Now witness us, gods." A moment later, the massive siege engine standing at the bow of the ship suddenly rang, sending a heavy bolt flying through the darkness. As it pierced the sky, a weave of ancient runes shone on its surface, and the winds howled, cut by its sharp blades. Streaking toward the distant armada like a falling star, the bolt struck the hull of the forward vessel and crushed straight through it, pulverizing a large part of the bow. It tore through the innards of the enemy ship, and then an explosion of pale light suddenly illuminated the vessel from within for a split second, leaving behind nothing but a cloud of bloody debris. The whole ship was destroyed in an instant. Noctis laughed madly, and as he did, the sailor dolls were already rushing to reload the engine. While they were busy with it, the sorcerer moved one of the oars, throwing his own ship into a turn to let its port side, and the loaded ballistae situated there faced the rushing enemy fleet. And just like that, the battle that was meant to change the course of history forever started. The sorcerer's ship had an advantage in size, speed, power of enchantments, and the reach of its weapons. However, the difference was not insurmountable. Before the bow engine could be reloaded, they would already be being pelted by arrows and harpoons of the enemy. Get ready, my friends. The sailor dolls pulled the levers of the portside ballistae, sending several smaller, but still devastating bolts flying toward the approaching armada. Others readied their bows, staring forward with indifferent wooden faces. Sunny raised Morgan's warbow ready to draw it, and threw a question over his shoulder. What of Solvane? What of Sun Prince? Noctis smiled wickedly. Can't you feel they are approaching? Song of the Fallen, my lady. I am afraid you will have to take the oars soon. Do not worry, however. As long as the moon shines, I will make easy work of those two. He lingered for a moment, sending the ship into another turn, and then added, Do worry about the enemy ships, though. If you are not careful, they will tear my beauty apart in no time, not to mention peppering you full of arrows. The ships he mentioned were almost in range to shoot their own onagers and ballistae. Even though the sorcerer's vessel was graceful, swift, and stalwart, it seemed impossible for anything to survive the devastating rain of projectiles. Sunny tensed, his pupils narrowing into two vertical slits of pure darkness. A few moments before the onslaught came, however, 14 fearsome shadows suddenly flew from below the islands and flashed upward, colliding against the first row of the enemy ships. Splinters of wood and torn limbs shot into the air, and for a moment, the enemy's formation was broken. Using that moment, Noctis sent the ship into a dive, narrowly avoiding the aim of the armada, and at the same time presenting its starboard. Another set of ballistae shot their bolts, adding to the mayhem. The sorcerer glanced at Sunny, Effie, and Kai with a wild smile. "It is your turn, Sunless. Now or nev." Then, however, he abruptly grew silent and flinched. Noctis's face, which had already been pale, turned white as a sheet. He groaned, and then slowly turned his head, looking up with a stunned expression. A moment later, Sunny heard the immortal let out an ominous whisper. "Oh, this is not good. Not good at all." Feeling a cold shiver run down his spine, Sunny turned and followed the sorcerer's gaze up and up into the night sky. Then he froze. What? The moon. The moon was disappearing. Chapter 715, Boarding Party. Out there in the sky, the silver disk of the moon was slowly being devoured by darkness, as if drowning in a vast and impenetrable shadow. One of its edges was already gone, and with each moment more and more of it was being erased by the shadows. It looked like an eclipse. Noctis paled, and at the same time, Sunny suddenly felt reinvigorated. It was as though every shadow in the world had just become deeper and darker, and as one of them he did too. The feeling was strange and euphoric. But Sunny knew that this eclipse was an ill omen for all of them. Turning to the sorcerer, he asked, "What is going on?" Noctis stared at the disappearing moon with a dark expression, and then shivered. I guess Severus had a trick of his own up his sleeve. I did not expect him to get his hands on a piece of Shadow's domain, though how is this even possible?" Seeing a lost expression on the sorcerer's face, Sunny growled. "How severe is your flaw? How weak are you going to be when the moon is fully gone? What do we do now?" The fleet of the Ivory City was still closing the distance to obliterate them, so there was no time to waste. They had a few moments before the clash, at best. He had to know what was going on. Noctis glanced at the dimming moon for one more second, then turned away and sighed. Well, a pale smile appeared on his lips. "Do you guys remember how I told you that I will take care of both Solvane and Sun Prince while you distract their armies?" The sorcerer's smile grew wider, a mad glint appearing in his eyes. "Change of plans. You will have to keep the prince busy for a bit too. I will try to deal with Solvane. Best of luck to you, my friends, and to me as well." With that, he stepped out of the magical circle and gestured for Cassie to grab the oars, which she hurriedly did. A moment later, Noctis was already standing on the board of the ship, his raven-black hair dancing in the wind. Sunny opened his eyes wide and screamed, "Wait, how the hell are we supposed to keep a transcendent busy?" The sorcerer threw a quick glance over his shoulder and laughed. "I don't know. Figure something out. Try to stab him with my knife, maybe." "No. Stabbing that steel behemoth won't do anything." With that, he simply took a step forward and fell down, disappearing in the darkness and the howling wind without a trace. Just like that, Noctis was gone. Sunny stared at the empty space where the sorcerer had been just a moment ago with a stunned expression. His momentary stupor was broken by Cassie's shout, "Sunny, there are only a few seconds left. What do we do?" The blind girl was controlling the flying ship, desperately trying to right its course so that it wouldn't take the full brunt of the Armada's siege weapons all at once. Sunny had no idea how she was able to fly the ancient vessel without being able to see, and it did not matter right now. He hesitated for a moment, then turned away and let out a resentful growl. "We follow the plan. Nothing really changed." Effie raised the dusk shard and asked, her voice grim, "What about the big bastard?" Sunny gritted his teeth. "Last I checked, that monstrosity cannot fly. As long as we stay in the air, we should be fine." Cassie pushed one of the oars down, then frowned. Her voice sounded hesitant. "But how do we stop him from going after Noctis?" He looked at her, then cursed. "No idea. Shoot him with the damned bolt thrower. The big one." With that, Sunny left the blind girl behind and rushed forward. The enemy ships were already close enough for him to feel shadows dancing on their decks. which meant that it was time for him, Effie, and Kai to join the fight. A large fleet was closing in on a swift vessel, its formation in a mess because of the 14 ghastly stone abominations wreaking havoc on the flying ships. Each of the massive gargoyles bore the soul of a vile, corrupted creature, so their might and ferocity were terrifying, not entirely on par with the original fiends that Noctis had slain, but close to it. And yet they alone were not enough. In fact, the 14 gargoyles were merely a distraction. The main strike was yet to come. As the graceful ship came within range of the fleet's siege weapons, it dove down, and at the same time, several figures jumped off its deck into the air. A few moments later, the air was suddenly filled with the smell of blood. The captain of one of the vessels shouted something, pointing upward. Then, however, he swayed and fell down, his neck pierced by an arrow. At the same time, something fell from above. It was a young girl carrying a heavy round shield. Just above her, a man in a charred wooden mask hovered in the air, already drawing the string of his bow once again. Effie, who had been tossed down by Kai, hit the deck of the ship, slid on the dusk shard for a moment, then rolled and jumped to her feet, the runic spear in her hand glowing with an angry red light. That shine only grew brighter when the spear pierced a man's chest and was painted with crimson blood. As another awakened toppled over with a scream, struck down by an arrow. Effie twisted and shook her spear, throwing the corpse of her first victim at the rushing enemies. Her shield flashed, its rim crushing someone's chest. Then an enemy blade fell from above, landing on her shoulder and bounced off her skin, not leaving behind even a scratch. A split second later, the attacker was already dead, and the young girl continued her slaughter, fighting like a demon released from the depths of hell, like a perfect vessel of war. There were only 2 pupils of the Red Sect left alive in the whole world, after all. One of them was Solvane, and the other was here on the ship, killing Solvane's followers one after another, with a feral grin on her childish face. If warriors on the other vessels of the fleet could have seen what was happening, they would have felt lucky to be safe from the little beast and her guardian's deadly arrows. But their relief would have been misplaced, because the young warrior and the flying archer were not the only ones boarding the flying ships. Much more terrifying than them were the coming shadows. Chapter 716, Head of the Snake. A swift figure streaked across the sky, and then a black steed landed on the deck of a flying ship, its eyes burning with crimson light. The stallion had a coat that was as black as night, 2 horns of adamantine metal, and fangs that resembled those of a wolf. On its back rode a graceful knight, clad in onyx armor, the scarlet blade of her odachi matching 2 ruby lights shining behind the visor of her closed helmet. Without pause, the dark rider sent her steed forward, and her sword flashed, beheading the nearest warrior of the Sun Legion in one smooth strike. The other awakened froze for a moment, suddenly grasped by a cold feeling of dread. And as fear crawled into their hearts, the terrifying crimson flames burning in the eyes of the tenebrous stallion ignited even brighter. It moved its head, biting into the neck of another soldier and tearing it wide open. More blood flowed onto the deck. On another ship, the soldiers suddenly screamed and aimed their bows up as a massive shadow suddenly covered the deck. But they were too late. As a gale of wind raised by mighty wings threw some of them off their feet, a repulsive creature crashed into the deck. It resembled a giant lion with the head of a raven, its body gaunt and entirely black. The creature had 2 powerful hind legs and 6 limbs protruding from its wide chest, each ending with a set of long talons. Lean muscles were rolling under its skin like worms, and its terrifying beak was open, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like fangs and a long tongue. Both the fangs and the tongue were of the same black color as the rest of the abominable monstrosity. Using the momentary shock of the warriors, the soul serpent, who had assumed the form of a spire messenger, reached out with its 6 arms and sliced 6 bodies apart with its talons. Blood sprayed into the air, and a chilling, ghastly wail escaped from its beak. And lastly, on the stern of yet another ship, a towering devil wearing black armor simply appeared out of the shadow, silently and without anyone noticing him for a split second. That 1 second was enough for a bolt of lightning to fly off his bow and hit a warrior in red armor that had been preparing to pull the lever of a ballista on the bow of the ship. Instantly, arcs of furious radiance chained to a dozen nearest soldiers, killing several, burning a few, and stunning the rest. Dismissing Morgan's warbow, Sonny dashed forward and brandished the cruel sight, as well as the austere tachi he held in the other two of his four hands. He knew that his time was short, yes, Sonny was powerful and so were his shadows, but when the defenders of the Ivory City recovered from the initial shock, they were going to show that each of them was an awakened too. And then, who knew how long he would be able to survive? The first thing to do was to cut off the head of the snake. Ramming into a tall soldier with his shoulder, Sonny sent him flying away and raised the midnight shard for a devastating downward slash. The captain of the ship, a gray-haired man with a noble face and a thick beard, reacted too fast, throwing his own sword up to block the attack. However, the tachi never came down. If Sonny really wanted to attack it with it, he would have never telegraphed his strike so clearly. Instead, the cruel sight shot forward from below, piercing the captain through the chest. Infused with divine flame, it easily went through his armor and flesh, killing the man on the spot. The warmonger only had time to look at Sonny with eyes clouded by pain and smile happily. Then, he fell down like a tree that had been cut down by an axe. Damned crazies. The captain was dead, which would make things easier for Sonny. However, there were still dozens of awakened warriors on the deck of the ship, now fully aware of his presence and clamoring to spill his blood. Sonny had fought plenty of Solvain's followers in the Red Colosseum and knew very well how skilled and powerful they were. He was not sure of his ability to survive a battle against that many, especially now that he had no shadows augmenting his body. 3 of them were with Saint, Serpent, and Nightmare, and the 4th one lay on the bloody deck behind him to serve as his eyes. With the enemy possessing such a terrible numeric advantage, he judged that being aware of his surroundings would be more useful than a bit of physical might. Regardless, Sonny was not going to fight them all unless he absolutely had to. Throwing the captain's corpse out of his way with a powerful kick, Sonny dashed forward and grabbed one of the steering oars the man had been holding. He might not have known how to fly a ship, but from watching Noctis and Cassie do it, he at least knew how to crash one. As the shadow lantern appeared on his belt and devoured all light nearby, thus hiding him in a cloud of darkness and making it harder for the archers to hit him, Sonny pulled the steering oar all the way to the right. Slowly, the flying ship started to turn left, going off course and breaking formation. A few arrows zipped past Sonny, one bouncing off his helmet and throwing his head back. He could see 10 or so of the closest warmongers already running at him, and further back, even more rushing to join their comrades. Those who had been stunned by the strike of thunder were coming to their senses as well. Scrap. Forced to keep the oar in place and thus immobilized, he gritted his teeth and threw the cruel sight as a javelin, aiming to kill the nearest of the approaching enemies. However, his spear simply froze in the air, as if the attackers were surrounded by an invisible barrier. In the next moment, a ball of furious light invaded the cloud of darkness that protected him, dimming somewhat, but not disappearing instantly. That was the problem with fighting against Awakened. Every one of them had an aspect, and each aspect was unique, making them excruciatingly unpredictable and hard to deal with. As more arrows were aimed at his head, Sonny cursed, let go of the oar, and dissolved into shadows. Left with no one to hold it in place, the steering oar returned to its natural position. But the damage was already done. Before anyone could get to it, the flying ship careened and rammed straight into the side of another one, piercing it with the metal beak of the forward ram and wedging itself deep into the Allied vessel. Both ships were heavily damaged by the collision, but the situation was still not unsalvageable. If an experienced captain acted with haste, at least one, or maybe even both vessels could be saved. But before that could happen, a 4-armed demon suddenly appeared from the shadows on the stern of the rammed ship. And a few moments later, its captain was dead too. Just like that, Sonny had doomed 2 ships and 100 souls to death with 2 strikes of his weapons. He glanced into the night sky for a moment and groaned. Just 90-something or so left. Great. A muffled, mad laugh suddenly escaped from his lips. Chapter 717, Slick with Blood. As 100 souls plummeted to their deaths in a rain of wooden debris, the four-armed devil who had doomed them to death laughed madly. Of course he was falling with the rest, but unlike most of the warriors on the broken ship, the devil had long grown accustomed to plummeting from great heights. After all, he had once spent a whole month falling into the endless darkness of the sky below. Dissolving into the shadows, Sunny appeared on the deck of the nearest ship. His sword flashed, ending the life of a Sun Legion soldier that stood in his way and sending blood spraying into the night air. There was only a moment before the enemies would shrug off the shock of his sudden arrival, and so he did not waste any time. Lunging forward, Sunny struck another warrior in the back with the cruel sight, slashed the midnight shard across the throat of an enemy archer, and wrapped his tail around the neck of a third soldier. Sending the last one overboard with a powerful throw, he bared his teeth and briefly glanced into the night sky. Out there in the lightless void, Effie and Kai had managed to slaughter the entire crew of one of the ships and sent the vessel crashing into the rest of the formation. The little girl jumped off the rails at the last moment, and the swift archer caught her, carrying both of them away toward the next target. The ship where Saint and Nightmare landed was silent and dark, with not a soul moving on it. Everyone was already dead, and the vessel was careening to the side, ready to plummet down. The black courser galloped across the bloody deck and soared into the sky, breaching a gap of 100 meters with a single jump and landing among Fearful Awakened on a different ship. Saint's scarlet odachi flashed. The Soul Serpent crashed on the deck of another flying vessel, the previous one he had visited breaking apart as it fell into the darkness. Before the warriors could react to the appearance of the ghastly abomination, its shape suddenly shifted, turning into a mass of liquid darkness. Then, the darkness flowed into a figure of a menacing knight. His black armor forged from a lusterless anthracite steel and decorated with intricate engravings. The great sword of the knight rose and fell like a guillotine, severing flesh and bone. Sunny grinned. Not bad. Effie and Kai had taken out 2 ships, while he and his shadows took out 4. The gargoyles had destroyed even more at this rate. Obliterating the entire fleet was not going to be as impossible as it had seemed. But of course, that was just an illusion. The main reason for that was a simple but inescapable fact, that their reserves of essence were not going to last that long. Every time Sunny used Shadow Step to travel between ships, he wasted a big chunk of his, not to mention the fact that using multiple active enchantments at the same time was constantly draining it as well. The Shadow Lantern was especially gluttonous. Every time Serpent killed an enemy, a small amount of essence flowed into Sunny's cores. However, the formless shadow was consuming its own essence at a terrible speed. Not only did it have to expend it to maintain the form of other creatures, but using their abilities had a cost too. The Soul Serpent was not going to be able to keep it up for long. The second reason was that for now, the cohort had the element of surprise on their side. As soon as the fleet realized what was happening, taking down the ships were going to grow much, much harder. So, all Sunny could do was deliver as much damage as he could, as fast as he could, and then hope for a miracle. Of course, with his luck, chances were that he would have to create that miracle himself. Killing another enemy, Sunny threw his corpse aside and dashed toward the captain of the ship, hoping to slay him and sow discord in the coordination of the vessel's crew. However, this time he failed to behead the snake with one swift strike. The officer of the Sun Legion that commanded the ship deflected his attack with frightening ease, and then delivered a blow of his own, throwing Sunny back. An angry hiss escaped from his lips. Damnation! The captain was an ascended, and one of remarkable might as well. Throwing a quick glance at the dozens of warriors surrounding him, Sunny gritted his teeth, and fought. He fought, as he had in front of the gate in the waking world, surrounded from all sides by nightmare creatures, using everything he had, every trick and deception he could muster, and every little bit of skill and experience he had earned in the past years. Soon the deck of the ship grew slick with blood, most of it human, but not all. There were a few drops of his own mixed into it as well, shining with the invisible light of divinity. Sunny killed as many enemies as he could, and then killed even more. The mantle of the underworld rang as a rain of blows landed on it, a few blades finding their way through the thin cracks and biting into his flesh. He spun and danced, reaping lives and jumping through shadows to avoid being entirely surrounded. The awakened warriors were bad enough, but their ascended captain was simply a menace. No matter what Sunny did, the man simply shrugged off all the attacks and pursued, closing distance in a split second, no matter how far away from him Sunny jumped. This could not go on any longer. I need to kill this bastard now. Once again forced to cross blades with the ascended and struggling to withstand the blow, Sunny activated the gates of shadow enchantment, drowning his immediate surrounding in darkness. The soldiers stumbled, failing to adjust in time. The ascended, however, had already learned of this ability of his and continued to attack, as though his eyes could adapt to the lack of light. This would have been very bad for Sunny, if he had not counted on exactly that fact. Deactivating the enchantment abruptly, he poured his essence into the cruel sight instead. Instantly, the darkness was replaced by a flash of brilliant sunlight. The captain might have been able to adjust his eyes to see in the dark, but could he do the reverse in an instant? Surprised by the sudden burst of radiant light, the ascended was blinded for a second. And a second was all Sunny needed. Guided by shadow sense, his spear shot forward and pierced the man's heart. A pulse of divine flame was all it took to make the terrible wound inescapably lethal. The rest was, if not easy, then at least simple. Sunny faced the remaining soldiers of the crew and slaughtered them one after another. He was this close to victory when his shadow noticed something streaking through the air, aimed at his back. Sunny flinched, then fell sideways. In the next moment, a massive bolt flew past and struck one of the warriors in the abdomen, throwing the man back like a rag doll and pinning him to the mast, which then exploded into splinters and toppled. Sunny's eyes grew wider. It seemed that the defenders of the Ivory City had finally understood the nature of the threat facing them and responded to it. 2 more ships were hovering some distance away, both aiming their ballistae, as well as numerous arrows, at one spot. Sunny gritted his teeth, and then dashed forward as fast as he could. Crap. Chapter 718, Heavenly Carnage. Sunny rolled over his shoulder, and just as he did, countless arrows hit the deck in the spot where he had been just a split second ago. Sent from powerful bows made for awakened archers, each carried enough force to pierce plate armor with ease. Of course, the mantle of the underworld was not just any armor. And yet Sunny was extremely apprehensive of the threat posed by archers. Being battered by a rain of arrows was going to take a toll on his body, and all it took was for one to slide into the slit of his visor, not to mention that there were all kinds of aspects the enemy could possess, and all kinds of runes the bows and the arrows could be enchanted with. The heavy javelins sent flying by the bolt throwers came next. Streaking through the air with terrifying speed, they hit the ship like missiles. Each possessed enough momentum to tear a hole in the deck, sending an explosion of splinters into the air. Sunny was not sure if he would be able to survive being hit by something like that, so he took no risks, diving into the shadows and turning into one of them. The wisest move right now would have been to step onto the deck of a different ship. However, only the 2 attacking vessels were close enough to not require a truly vast expenditure of essence to perform a jump, and their crews were undoubtedly already prepared to resist an assault. Plus, Sunny was reluctant to leave without killing the remaining soldiers and destroying the ship completely. He had a very good reason for that. While the gargoyles and the 4 boarding parties were harassing the formation and slowly whittling down the number of enemy vessels, the fleet's main target still remained the same. All of them were attacking the graceful ship with a beautiful tree growing around its mast, surrounding it like a murder of hungry crows. Cassie was the 5th and final part of the cohort's assault force, and the one in the most danger. While Sunny and the rest fought with the soldiers of the defending fleet, she was battling the fleet itself. Guided by her hand, the sorcerer's ship maneuvered between the enemy vessels, barely dodging constant shots of their harpoons and siege weapons while responding with its own attacks from time to time. The bolts sent by its ballistae were much more devastating due to runes carved into them by Noctis, taking whole chunks out of the enemy ships or obliterating them completely. It was larger, faster, and much more durable, but it was also alone against countless foes. As Sunny rushed through the shadows toward the stern, he caught a glimpse of the graceful ship as it dove down, the figures of sailor dolls bracing themselves against rails and releasing the strings of their powerful bows. There were deep scratches on its hull and holes in its sails, dozens of arrows sticking out of the deck like needles, but it was still in one piece. Due to Cassie's intuition and uncanny aspect ability, she had been able to predict and avoid the enemy attacks, at least to some degree for now. But the pressure on the lonely ship was mounting with each second, and no matter how many enemy vessels she destroyed, this deadly aerial dance could not continue much longer. Knowing that, the young woman threw the ship into a dive, falling from the dark sky like a star. She was leading the fleet down toward the surface, where she would be able to maneuver between the flying islands and use their solid mass as a shield. That was extremely dangerous, since any ship moving that low ran a risk of crashing into an island or, even worse, into one of the heavenly chains. But Cassie had no choice. She had to limit the amount of vessels that had a direct line of sight of her ship if she wanted to turn the threat posed by the enemy's overwhelming numerical advantage from insurmountable to simply lethal. She was barely hanging on to life, and so Sonny could not allow himself to leave this ship before it was disposed of completely. Sure, it was already damaged, and the few soldiers that still lived were not going to be able to both control it and mount the onagers and ballistae, but it would take just one heroic fool with a death wish to ram the damaged vessel into Cassie, taking out the main force of their small army. Emerging from the shadows at the stern, Sonny used the second or two it took the enemy archers to notice him and take aim again to push one of the steering oars all the way up, wedge the prowling thorn into the wood, and then secure the handle of the oar in place with the invisible string attached to the heavy kunai. The ship shuddered, and then its bow turned down, sending it into a downward dive. Sonny made it just in time. Not a moment after he finished the task, a heavy arrow hit him in the back, sending a jolt of pain and a concussive shock running through his body. He was roughly thrown forward and hit the deck, which was slowly turning into a vertical wall. Sonny allowed himself to slide down, dodging a few more arrows that way, and saw the remaining soldiers falling into the night sky with terrified screams. A feral grin appeared on his face. Done. It was time for him to abandon the ship as well. By pure coincidence, at that very moment, the falling vessel happened to be at the same altitude as the descending ship that Cassie controlled. Pushing himself off the deck to dive into the shadows, Sonny noticed the massive siege engine on the bow of the sorcerer's ship take aim at an enemy boat. It seemed as if another enemy was going to be destroyed in a second. Then, however, Cassie suddenly gave up on the sure shot and threw the ship into a desperate spin, changing course so abruptly that one of the sailor dolls was thrown overboard. Sonny frowned. What? Before he could finish the thought, the vessel he was still standing on suddenly exploded into debris as something massive tore through it at a stunning speed and then streaked through the lightless sky, missing Cassie's ship by a hair's breadth. Instead, the thing hit one of the sorcerer's gargoyles and obliterated it completely, turning the terrifying creature into a cloud of stone dust in a blink of an eye. It was only a second later, when Sonny found himself falling down with nothing there to support his weight anymore, that he registered what the thing was. It was a narrow pillar of polished steel, at least 50 meters in length, that ended in a sharp point. That pillar, it looked like a javelin worthy of a giant. Stunned, Sonny turned his head and looked in the direction of the Ivory City as he fell. His eyes widened. He did not like what he saw. He did not like it at all. Chapter 719, Dark Moon. Out there in the distance, just outside of the Ivory City, a steel colossus towered above a desolate island, his gargantuan body shrouded in darkness. The terrible wound delivered to him by Noctis was mostly repaired, with broken scaffolds hanging from the giant where he had torn himself out of them to join the battle. However, he was still missing an arm. The face of the giant was stoic and unmoving, and his eyes drowned in deep shadows. In front of him, dozens of enormous javelins were thrust into the soil, each tall enough to dwarf a siege tower. As Sonny looked, Sun Prince calmly grabbed one of them, then pulled it out of the ground and moved his hand up, preparing to make another throw. Crap! Plummeting down, Sonny balanced himself in the air and then dove in a certain direction. A few moments later, he crashed into a large fragment of the destroyed ship's hull and disappeared, diving into the shadows on its surface. In a blink of an eye, Sonny rolled onto the deck of one of the two attacking vessels and jumped to his feet, ready to fight. He could not do anything to the steel colossus. All he could do was continue playing his part and pray that Cassie manages to survive. If she failed to draw the giant's attention away from Noctis, all of them were going to die, but he could not do anything about that either. Sonny could make sure that there were fewer enemy ships pursuing her, however, and that was what he intended to do. Killing things was one of his greatest talents, after all. With a loud roar, he dashed forward toward a battle formation of awakened soldiers. Unlike the crews of the ships he had destroyed already, these warriors had been waiting for an attack, and so were prepared, but it would not save them. They were still going to die, just a split second before the four-armed devil collided against the front row of the enemy. A sickening feeling suddenly permeated their souls, sapping their hands of strength and filling them with insidious pain. Augmented by the underworld armament enchantment of the onyx armor, the broken oath spread its eroding influence, slowly destroying the very souls of everyone around Sonny. Of course, his own soul was being damaged as well, but it was much stronger than that of mere beasts, and protected by the mantle of the underworld on top of that. He was not going to be able to endure the effect of the vile charm for long, but that did not matter. He just needed to last longer than his enemies. Turning the cruel sight into a sword and summoning the patient avenger into a free hand, Sonny crashed into the formation of weakened enemies and spun, dancing as he sowed death among them. His two blades and his tail moved as if possessing their own lives, and the charred kite shield soon started to emanate an angry orange glow as a rain of strikes fell on it. As it did, the blade of the cruel sight suddenly shone with incandescent white light, and the austere Tachi with dim orange one. Infused with flames, one divine, the other mundane, both blades cut through steel armor as if it was made of paper. Screams of terror and agony rose above the deck of the flying ship, disappearing into the moonless night. Similar slaughter was happening on other ships of the fleet as well. Effie was rampaging on a slippery deck, moving like a wrecking ball across its blood-soaked surface. When someone tried to attack her from the back, they were killed by sharp arrows falling from the darkness. Kai moved swiftly above the ship, dodging enemy archers and never missing a kill shot. He was dealing almost as much damage as the feral girl, just like what had happened to Sonny. Other vessels moved to assist the one where the two were fighting. But as they did, a black steed landed on the deck of one, while a dark abomination with the head of a raven landed on another. For a few minutes, the defensive formation was in chaos. And then, even more ships had to abandon the hunt for the graceful vessel of the traitorous sorcerer to come to their rescue. When they did, however, the stone gargoyles attacked them, causing even more mayhem. Some distance away, Cassie had managed to reach the sky below and was now being pursued in a deadly race between the flying islands, causing several of the enemy ships to break apart as they collided with the heavenly chains and allowing the sailor dolls to shoot several more down with the siege engines. Down there, she was protected both from the unobstructed attacks of the fleet and from the steel giant's javelins. For a moment, things seemed to be going well, but that was exactly the problem. Left without a target, the steel colossus threw two more javelins, destroying one or two gargoyles with each of throw, and then paused, his gaze traveling across the lightless islands. Just as it did, one of them quaked viciously, and a large chunk of it suddenly crumbled, falling into the abyss of the sky below in a cloud of stone debris. The heavenly chain attached to it was released and whipped across the sky, pulverizing a couple of unfortunate ships that happened to be in its way. Then, something strange happened. The shadow devouring the moon finally spread across all of it, leaving nothing but an empty circle of darkness on the surface of the night sky. But then, that circle suddenly became infused with a dim red glow, and the moon slowly revealed itself once again. Only now, it was not silver anymore. Instead, the moon was red as blood and drowned the whole world in an eerie crimson radiance. Still fighting on the deck of the ship and being poisoned by the soul erasure of the broken oath, Sonny spared a moment to glance at the sky and then pulled his attention back to the battle. Moving through the dim crimson light, he killed another human, gritted his teeth, and then thought, I wonder if this is good news for us, or bad. A distance away, Sun Prince stared at the crimson moon for a few moments as well. Then he shifted his gaze back to the broken island and raised his hand, aiming a javelin at something only he could see on its dark, shattered surface. Chapter 720, Crimson Sky. Sunny did not know much about astronomy. However, due to being born during a solar eclipse, he knew a thing or two about eclipses, a useless piece of knowledge he had never thought would become so vital one day. After being devoured by the shadows, the moon had turned red, which seemed like a sign of its return. However, in reality, it just meant that the moon was now fully submerged in the deepest, darkest part of the planet's shadow. So did Noctis get his power back? Had he grown more powerful than ever even? Or was he currently the weakest he had ever been? Was the damned dream realm even a planet? Sunny did not know and had no time to wonder. He was being destroyed from the inside by the broken oath and relentlessly attacked by the warriors of the Ivory City at the same time. No matter how many he killed, their tide did not seem to wane. Well, in that case, he just had to kill even more. Jumping back, Sunny braced himself and then put his shoulder behind the patient Avenger. In the next moment, a fiery explosion boomed on the deck of the ship. Far away on a desolate island bordering the Ivory City, Sun Prince raised his hand and aimed the gargantuan javelin, his gaze locked on the ferocious battle between Noctis and Solvane that no one except for him was able to see. His emotionless face glistened with crimson light, reflecting the radiance of the blood moon. Damnation! Thrown down by the detonation of the flames contained within the kite shield and surrounded by a red haze, Sunny rose shakily and stared at the steel colossus, his heart growing cold. Noctis the bastard had to be aiming at Noctis. If the sorcerer died, they were going to die with him. Powerless to change anything, Sunny just gritted his teeth and watched. That was why he saw a graceful ship suddenly emerging from the darkness of the sky below, its bow aimed at Sun Prince. Left with no other choice, Cassie had abandoned the safety of the treacherous gaps between the islands and threw her vessel up in a desperate attempt to stall the monstrous giant. The massive siege engine on the bow of the ship shuddered, and a heavy bolt streaked through the dark red sky, hitting the Colossus right in the chest. Then it detonated, drowning the world in pale blue light for a moment. Sunny froze, his eyes opening wide. Crazy girl, she actually did it. When the flash of the explosion disappeared, he saw the towering figure of the prince sway slightly and take half a step back. Then, Sun Prince indifferently looked down at a barely visible scratch left on the breastplate of his polished armor. He did not seem damaged by the devastating detonation of the enchanted bolt at all. However, he did forget about Noctis, at least for now. That had not come without a cost, though. Cassie's desperate maneuver might have distracted the Colossus, but it left her in a vulnerable position. 4 of the pursuing enemy ships had managed to close distance and surrounded the graceful vessel, showering its deck with arrows. Several sailor dolls fell down, their wooden bodies damaged heavily or destroyed completely. The rest released their own arrows. There were 2 mannequins standing beside the blind young woman, each holding a heavy shield. By now, both shields were riddled with arrows, and this time, their protection turned out to be lacking. 2 arrows slid past Cassie's defenders. She deflected one with the quiet dancer, but the second struck her in the shoulder, throwing the slender girl back. At the same time, the 4 enemy ships shot the heavy ballistae standing on their bows, and 4 wicked bolts hit the hull of the graceful vessel. 2 bounced off, but the other 2 must have possessed powerful enchantments. They lodged themselves deep into the ancient wood, but failed to deal any substantial damage. However, dealing damage was not their real purpose. Each bolt was connected to the ship that had shot it by a thick chain. Harpooned by them, Cassie's vessel was severely slowed down and pulled into 2 different directions, its hull groaning, as if on the verge of being ripped apart. The 2 ships that failed to sink their harpoons into it were free to either close in to send a boarding party over, or simply ram it at high speed. And not too far away, Sun Prince was already readying his javelin again. However, Sunny did not see any of this. After a few moments of disorientation, those warriors who had survived the blast of fire from the patient Avenger had renewed their assault. Thrown into a frenzy by the death of so many of their comrades, he was forced to fight without paying attention to anything else. In this battle, each of the members of the cohort had a role to play. He was powerless to help Cassie even if he wanted to. Sonny had to survive his own ordeal, and the blind girl had to survive hers. That bitter feeling of powerlessness, he had not tasted it in a long, long time. Deflecting a deadly blow of the enemy's sword, and killing the man wielding it with a lightning-fast slash of the midnight shard, Sonny let out a hoarse, resentful growl. Hate it. I hate this feeling. Far away, the sailor dolls somehow managed to sever one of the harpoon chains, a few of them silently falling into the crimson darkness in the process. Cassie broke the shaft of the arrow lodged in her shoulder, gritted her teeth, and took the oars again. Now held by only one vessel, she did not try to escape by playing tug-of-war with it, and instead suddenly turned her ship in the direction of the enemy. Not expecting this, the enemy captain did not react in time. As the result, the metal beak of the sorceress ship's ram crashed into its side at full speed, piercing the hull and splitting the whole vessel in half. A moment later, the sailor dolls shot the portside balliste, several more bolts glancing ineffectively off the giant's impenetrable steel body without leaving even a scratch. It did get his attention, however. Another javelin flew at the graceful ship, missing it just by a meter or two. Cassie did not die, and Sonny did not die either. He slaughtered the last of the ship's defenders and drew in a rugged breath, then braced himself when the deck suddenly shuddered under him. What? Looking up, he saw boarding hooks biting into the wooden railings, and planks being thrown from the deck of another ship to the one he was standing on. Dozens of warriors in red armor were already jumping over, their eyes burning with bloodlust and a maniacal dream of glory. He remained motionless for a split second, and then tiredly smiled. Oh, they came themselves. I see. How convenient. I won't have to waste essence on using Shadow Step. Gripping his weapons, Sonny threw a glance overboard. Only 9 gargoyles remained, but all members of the cohort seemed to be still alive, if a little worse for wear. The enemy fleet was missing 24 ships, or even more. Things were about to get really hard, however. Now that they had the undivided attention of Sun Prince, now that their reserves of essence were starting to run dry, the real trial was about to start. Illuminated by the dim crimson radiance, Sonny bared his fangs and dashed toward the rushing enemies. Chapter 721, Dreadful Threat. Sonny cut through the crew of the boarding ship, leaving no one alive. His towering figure moved among the enemies with incredible speed and grace, as if performing a macabre dance of death. His battle style was as shapeless and unpredictable as the devil himself, effortlessly switching from grounded defense to explosive offense, to monstrous ferocity that only a nightmare creature could possess. He fought with his 4 hands, with his fangs and horns, even with his armored tail. As more and more enemies fell, cut down by the burning blades, a scorching haze of evaporating blood surrounded him like a crimson mantle. Here and there, the 2 connected ships were already catching on fire, their sails burning in the dim red darkness of the night sky like funeral pyres for the warriors dying by his hand. And then, suddenly, there was no one left for him to kill. Dismissing the broken oath, Sonny groaned and leaned heavily on the cruel sight. His breath was labored and rugged, and the mantle of the underworld was covered by countless scratches. Beneath the onyx armor, his body was bruised and battered, with several shallow wounds seeping with blood where the enemy blades or aspect abilities had found their way through the cracks. Sonny gritted his teeth. How many ships did I take out? 3, 4, no, 5. He looked around, trying to ascertain the situation. The others had done well too. Together with the gargoyles, the cohort had managed to destroy. His eyes widened. Almost half of the enemy fleet was gone. Dozens of ships were obliterated. Thousands of brave warriors killed. A lion's share of that had been done by Cassie and the sailor dolls, as well as the gargoyles, but still. Sonny drew in a hoarse breath. When did we become so scary? The thought of being the big, dreadful threat, for once, was refreshing, and yet, his excitement was short-lived. No matter how powerful the cohort had become and how well they had planned the battle, it was still not enough. By now, the tide of it was already shifting, their temporary success waning with each second. Sunny, Effie, and Kai had exhausted most of their essence. The soul serpent was mere moments away from losing its ability to assume the form of other shadows. Saint and Nightmare were faring better than the rest of them, but they too seemed to be slowing down, more and more injuries accumulating on the black body of the fearsome steed, its taciturn rider moving with visible strain. Much worse than that, the sorcerer's ship was playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with Sun Prince. Guided by Cassie's hand, the vessel was still in one piece, but it was unclear how long she would be able to outrun death. Without her presence on the battlefield, the rate at which the enemy ships were being destroyed diminished drastically, and each had more freedom to move and attack. And the gargoyles were no more. Most of them were destroyed by the steel colossus, some were overpowered and shattered by the ascended warriors of the defending fleet. The few that remained were struggling, caught in enchanted chain nets and moments from being obliterated. The blood moon still shone with crimson radiance, as though the eclipse had no intention of ever ending, and there was no sign of Noctis. There was no sign of Sylvain either, which meant that the sorcerer was still alive at least. The only indication that the two immortal transcendents were out there, somewhere, locked in a vicious fight, were the loud rattling of the heavenly chains and sudden quakes that run through one island after another. The island swayed as pieces of them crumbled into the sky below. Hoping that Noctis would arrive and save them all like a god out of the machine was pointless. Hoping for anything was pointless. They were here to release Hope from her shackles after all, and not the other way around. The situation was about to turn really, really bad for the cohort, and there was no way Sunny could think of to change it. No problem. I'll just go and destroy 5 more ships somehow, and then 5 more. Falling down, he dove into the shadows and stepped through them, wasting some of his last essence to appear on a different ship. Sunny might have been tired, but the battle went on. The world did not care about his exhaustion. It only cared about one thing. Sunny had to fight or die. On a different vessel, Effie stared at the broken remains of the runic spear in her hand for a short moment, then let out an infuriated shout and bashed the attacking enemy with what was left of its shaft, using it as a club to shatter his leg. The dusk shard was growing heavy in her hand, and she had no essence left to spare to activate the indomitable enchantment and change its weight. Because of that, Effie was a split second too slow, and a sharp blade passed beneath the shield to slash her across the shoulder. This time, the blade did not bounce off the girl's skin, and instead sliced it apart. Drops of blood fell down to the slick deck. High above, Kai barely dodged an enemy arrow and reached toward his quiver, only to find it empty. Gritting his teeth, he dashed to the side, caught another arrow out of the air, then instantly knocked his on the string of his bow and sent it flying back at the archer, hitting the man in the eye. His essence was nearly gone as well, and he had already lost too much blood to the blood arrow. Mundane ones were all he could use, and now he had none left. A few moments later, the man in a charred wooden mask crashed into the deck of the ship, a few steps away from Effie, and spun, summoning a sharp saber. He was prepared to cover the young girl's back to his last breath, if need be. And some distance away, Cassie finally failed to dodge one of the monstrous javelins completely. It streaked across the deck of the graceful ship, turning the massive siege engine on its bow into a cloud of splinters, tearing out a part of the hull, and obliterating a dozen sailor dolls along with it. The young woman paled at the sounds of carnage, then hesitated for a few long moments. Then, a resolute expression appeared on her beautiful face. With a steady hand, she pushed one of the oars all the way down. Following her command, the ancient vessel abandoned the border between the two skies and started climbing up. Higher, higher, and then higher still, as if trying to reach the crimson moon itself. Chapter 722, Soul Reaver. Landing on the deck of the enemy ship, Sunny swayed and caught himself, then stared somberly at the warriors of the Sun Legion, all of whom had already noticed his arrival. Following the command of the captain, the swordsmen advanced in a loose but orderly formation. Behind them, the archers drew their bows and aimed them at the towering devil, their eyes shining with faith and resolve. They did not get a chance to shoot, however. A split second later, a ghastly abomination landed between them, its 6 front limbs and terrifying beak reaping half a dozen lives in an instant. This was Sunny's signal to move. He dashed toward the ranks of the advancing swordsmen, and at the same time, the soul serpent attacked them from behind. The two cut through the defenders of the ship and met in the middle of its deck. It was at that moment that the shadow finally exhausted the last of its essence. The abominable form of the spire messenger suddenly lost its shape and crumbled into a tide of darkness, which then rushed toward Sunny. A serpentine black odachi then appeared in his hands. Sunny dismissed his other weapons, leaving only the great blade to keep him company, and roared. He was too low on essence to use any of their enchantments anyway. But each kill of the odachi was going to return a portion of it into his cores. More than that, the soul serpent was not the only one who reunited with Sunny. The haughty shadow had returned as well, and had already wrapped itself around his body, alleviating some of his exhaustion and gifting him with its strength. Now, all Sunny had to do was fight and kill. With each of the enemies that fell, he was going to replenish more of his dwindling shadow essence, and that essence would then be used to kill more enemies and destroy more ships. As long as he continued to kill, he would not have to stop. Unless he was killed himself, of course. Soul Reaver was indeed an insidious ability. In a split second before the avalanche of enemies descended on him, Sunny glanced into the crimson sky. Out there at a distance, the graceful ship was climbing high into the sky. Its hull was in shambles, with several sections of it shattered by the heavy bolts of the enemy ballistae. The powerful siege engine on its bow was gone, blown away by some terrible strike. There was a massive harpoon lodged in the vessel's side, with a piece of an enemy ship swinging below it on a thick chain. Barely any sailor dolls remained on the deck, most of them broken or destroyed. Seeing the pitiful state of the once majestic ship, Sunny couldn't help but grit his teeth. Then he frowned. What the hell is she doing? Why was Cassie rising into the sky? Out there in the boundless vastness of the night, there was nothing to protect her from the ire of Sun Prince and the enemy ships. The winds were much stronger up there, and the air much thinner. It was very risky. However, Sunny had no time to think about it. The blind girl must have known what she was doing out of everyone he knew. He was confident in Cassie's foresight the most. She always had a reason. Throwing these thoughts out of his mind, Sunny strangled his worry for her and clashed with the first few of the enemies. He slashed down, splitting the opponent's helmet and skull with the sharp blade of the great odachi, then slammed its hilt into another man's face, shook the first corpse off the sword, and cut low, severing another enemy's leg. Then Sunny grabbed the disoriented man whose face he had just crushed with one of his free hands and, using his body as a shield, barreled through the enemies, slashing left and right. The mantle of the underworld rang, withstanding several powerful blows. One of the strikes was especially dire. Something managed to cut through the onyx armor and bit deep into his flesh, making Sunny stumble and hiss. It was the captain of the vessel. The woman in bright armor stood among the slaughtered archers, her hands raised, 2 discs of sharp, blinding light forming on her palms. Cursing, Sunny threw the body of the still struggling enemy at the attacking legionnaires, and then bent down, picking up a stray bolt meant for the ship's ballistae. In the hand of the towering demon, the massive projectile almost looked like an oversized spear. Sending some of the newly received essence into his muscles, Sunny grunted, and then tossed the bolt with all his might. The captain's eyes widened, but before she could even move, the improvised javelin struck her in the chest with the force of a siege ram, ending the woman's life immediately. You have slain and ascended. Sunny had no time to celebrate, because he was once again being attacked from all sides. The corner of his mouth twitched. She was an ascended, huh? He slaughtered the remaining crew of the ship, then rammed it into another vessel and slaughtered its defenders as well. By then, the mantle of the underworld was full of cracks and gaps, and his battered body beneath was full of holes. On the bright side, he had regained enough essence to freely activate the living stone enchantment of his armor, which allowed it to quickly recover from the damage and glisten darkly once again, its surface flawless and pristine. Sunny could not say the same about himself. Even though he had managed to recover some essence, his physical state was swiftly deteriorating. The countless shallow wounds were not too dangerous, especially because blood weave refused to allow his blood to flow out of them. A couple of the more serious injuries he had received were not too bothersome for now as well. However, his endurance was not limitless. Sunny was dead tired, and no amount of essence could fix that. He had only managed to last that long because of the blood blossom and the underworld armament, but even that was not enough to sustain him anymore. And the battle still raged on. Cassie had climbed so high into the sky that he could not even see her damaged ship anymore, taking most of what remained of the enemy fleet with her. The light of their lanterns turned into small dots that moved high above, resembling falling stars. From time to time, a piece of broken wood would fall from the darkness, reminding him that a fierce clash was still taking place up above. The pressure on the boarding parties reduced somewhat, but there were still a dozen ships left to stall them, or rather, hunt them down. Now that Sunny, his shadows and his friends were tired and riddled with wounds, the roles they played subtly changed. He was not sure who was attacking whom anymore. But worst of all, with the distraction of Cassie's ship gone, the steel colossus once again resumed his search for Noctis. Sun Prince grabbed two of his gargantuan javelins, then bent slightly, and lunged forward. Gaining incredible speed, the giant leaped into the air, flew across a vast gap between two islands, and landed on the surface of a new one, with a thunderous crash. This island was just one chain away from the Ivory City, with several tall pillars rising into the air to serve as mooring masts for the flying ships. Much more importantly, from it the Colossus had a clear shot at the last place where Noctis and Solvane had shown themselves, still locked in terrible combat. Sun Prince gazed into the crimson darkness and then slowly raised his hand. Chapter 723, Falling Star. Scrap. The ship Sunny had just cleared happened to be very near to the island where Sun Prince was standing. In fact, all of the remaining ships were close to it, due to the fact that the battle had gradually shifted closer to the Ivory City. He was not sure how much time it took, and for how long he had been fighting. All he knew was how terribly tired he felt, and that they were on the verge of utter defeat. Looking at the steel colossus that was just beyond reach, Sunny gritted his teeth. The bastard was not allowed to throw that javelin. He had to be stopped at all costs. Noctis had to be protected. Not because Mordred told him so, but simply because the sorcerer was their best, and most likely only, chance to survive. Sunny hesitated for a split second, and then summoned Nightmare and Saint back. The shadows were entangled in a bloody battle on the deck of a distant ship. Following his command, the black steed did not waste a single moment to turn and leap into the dark sky. Landing on another vessel, it flew past the startled and terrified soldiers, then jumped again. Just like that, the stallion soon reached Sunny and stopped, his sides rising heavily, covered in terrible wounds. Bloody foam was falling from his mouth. The courser's eyes, however, were still full of unbreakable will and murderous resolve. He was a proud and stubborn creature, after all, almost as stubborn as Sunny. Sunny offered him a pale smile. "You did well, rest now for a bit." Saint dismounted and stood motionlessly, looking at him with her usual calm composure. Her ruby eyes, however, seemed to have become a little dim. The taciturn knight's armor was cracked and battered, but she did not appear to be seriously injured. There was ruby dust streaming from the cracks, still. Sunny summoned the shadows, embracing Nightmare and Saint back, and then wrapped all four of them around his body. Below, the steel colossus had already taken aim and was prepared to make his throw. Before he could, however, a heavy bolt suddenly struck him in the neck. The giant lingered for a moment, then slowly turned his head. Standing at the bow of the ship, Sunny picked up another bolt and smiled grimly. He did not know how to load and aim a ballista, but his own strength was more than enough, or perhaps even greater than that of a siege weapon. Sure, his first throw did not seem to do any damage. It had to have been rather annoying, though. Augmented by the sonorous enchantment, the extraordinary rock boomed, spreading his voice far and wide. "Hey you, Shadow sends his regards. Come and get me. Rust Bucket. How's that hand feeling, by the way?" Illuminated by the dim light of the crimson moon. The Colossus shifted slightly. The shadows veiling his eyes grew deeper, and then his javelin slowly moved, changing its aim. Sunny laughed. "I guess he remembers me," which was good. What was bad was that Sunny did not really know how to steer a flying ship, and so he currently was a stationary target. A sitting duck, basically. With a shrug, he dismissed his shadows and tossed the second bolt at the giant, then looked in satisfaction as it bounced fruitlessly off the chain lord's stoic face. My aim did improve, huh? Just one more throw, and it would be time for him to abandon ship. Sun Prince lowered his head and then suddenly lashed out, moving with stunning speed for a creature of his size. It was as though he was trying to kill an irritating fly. Sunny's smile froze. He had not expected that fast of a reaction at all. A split second before the javelin hit the ship, a hand grabbed him from behind, and Sunny felt himself moving. Then, something exploded below him, and everything was momentarily enveloped in a cloud of splinters. Kai, who was holding him as he tried to fly up, grunted, "Hey, Peffy." In the next moment, they were hit by the shockwave, and the archer lost his hold of the four-armed demon. Together they plummeted down. Effie was there too, clinging to Kai's back and holding on for her dear life. The two seemed riddled with wounds, but still alive. Sunny felt the world spin for a couple of seconds, then shook off his disorientation, summoned the dark wing, and tried to slow down his fall. They landed on the surface of the island and instantly moved, dodging the debris of the destroyed ship. All three somehow managed to avoid being crushed. Then, however, the ground beneath them suddenly shook. Feeling a sickening emptiness in his chest, Sunny slowly turned his head and saw the towering mountain of steel walking toward them, the island quaking with each of the giant's steps. The nightmarish memory of being smashed like a bug by Sun Prince's soul flashed in front of his eyes once again, making Sunny flinch and back away. There was nowhere they could run, however, and more importantly, they couldn't. They still needed to draw Sun Prince away from Noctis. But what could they do but die, faced with the fury of an immortal transcendent? Sunny paled. Think. He raised his odachi with uncertainty, desperately trying to evaluate their chances. He still had some essence left, enough for a few minutes of remaining a shadow, or making a jump or two. Would that be enough? What of the others? And what was he going to do when his essence ran out? Then, a sudden sound attracted his attention. Looking up, Sunny saw something that made his eyes widen. Far above, in the dark red sky, a silhouette of a graceful ship appeared from the radiance of the moon. Battered and damaged, the ship was flying almost falling down. It had been descending from terrible heights, and so gathered such staggering momentum that the winds screamed loudly as they were being cut by the bow of the plummeting vessel. This was the sound Sunny had heard. He could almost see a delicate silhouette standing at the stern, holding the oars in her hands. Cassie, falling from the sky like a star, the battered ship changed its course slightly, and then rammed into the giant steel colossus at full speed, causing the whole world to tremble. Chapter 724. Weight of Regret. The battered ship fell from the dim red darkness of the sky, and illuminated by the eerie radiance of the crimson moon, crashed into the towering steel colossus. The armored beak of the ship's ram struck the giant's chest with such tremendous force that there was a blinding flash of light, and then a powerful shockwave rolled across the island, violently throwing Sunny off his feet. The deafening roar of the impact came as he fell, rolling on the ground. Sunny was assaulted by the thundering crash of the blast, the rumbling groan of shattering wood, and the booming shriek of heavy metal being ripped apart. Stunned and disoriented, he rose to his knees, then swayed a little and looked up. What he saw made him pale. The sorcerer's ship lay broken on the ground. The fluid lines of its graceful hull were broken and gaped with terrible breaches, wide cracks running through the ancient wood. Its bow was completely shattered, and the damage in the front part of the vessel was especially severe. The beautiful tree growing around its main mast seemed damaged and dead. Cassie was nowhere in sight. At the very edge of the island, thrown back, Sun Prince knelt. The steel colossus was swaying dangerously, clutching at his face with his one remaining hand. At the spot where the ram of the ship had struck, his chest was caved in and ripped open, rivers of molten metal flowing from the terrible wound. And in the depths of the wound, turned incandescent by the heat, A cage made in the form of a human figure was revealed. The cage was slightly broken too, and a charred hand could be seen clawing at the edges. Under its fingers, the metal was bending like cloth, slowly being torn away. Sonny shuddered, and then turned his gaze back to the wreck of the flying ship. Cassie, where's Cassie? He could not see the blind young woman anywhere in the wreckage. However, Sonny saw someone else. A bloodied figure suddenly fell from above, bounced off the ground, and crashed into the hull of the ship, causing more cracks to appear on its surface. Raven black hair, pale skin, it was Noctis. The sorcerer did not look good. His whole body was covered in blood, terrible wounds gaping open here and there. His beautiful face was broken and disfigured, the skin split open and white bone visible beneath, with one eye socket empty and full of darkness. He was still alive, though, of course he was. Noctis could not escape from the pain into the merciful embrace of death even if he wanted to. As Sonny watched, paralyzed for a moment, something flashed through the air, and a graceful figure appeared for a split second in front of the sorcerer, her beautiful chestnut hair dancing in the wind. In the next moment, a large portion of the hull of the ship exploded as Noctis was pushed through it by a vicious strike. Both saints disappeared into the darkness of the ancient vessel, which then shuddered, hinting that their dreadful battle continued. Sonny froze, looking between the swaying colossus and the wreckage of the ancient ship. His mind was empty, and he did not know what to do. Or rather, he could not decide what took priority. There was not much time to decide, however. Gritting his teeth, he looked around, searching for his friends. Kai seemed to be knocked out by the blast a little, but Effie was already on her feet, staring in the same direction as he. There was a grim expression on her face. Sonny groaned, then slowly stood up. Effie, any ideas? She hesitated for a moment, then flashed him a pale smile. I guess it's this time. He frowned. What time? The young girl glanced at the wreckage, and then said wistfully, You know that time when, in the movies, someone says to split up. Sonny stared at her, not entirely understanding what she meant. Effie's gaze slowly shifted to the kneeling colossus, and in a steady voice she said, Give me the knife, the ruby one. I'll deal with the big bastard. You and Kai go and find Cassie, then help the lunatic in that order. He's not going to die anytime soon anyway. He stared at her from above, deep shadows veiling his eyes. Sonny had a lot to say, but in the end he simply asked, Are you sure? The young girl laughed. Don't I look like I'm sure? Relax, doofus. It's just an immortal transcendent. We better deal with that thing before it escapes the cage anyway. Sonny gritted his teeth, then summoned the covetous coffer and handed Effie the knife that they had gotten from the creature in the lake. There was no time to say anything else, and no need to. Effie took the knife, gripped his wrist for a moment, and then dashed away without looking back. Sonny helped Kai stand up, and supporting the disoriented archer, hurried toward the wreckage of the crashed ship. As they ran, an ugly expression appeared on his bestial face. Don't you die on me, you freeloader. Your sleeping pod is still in my house, damn it. Do you even how much hassle it is to properly dispose of a corpse if you have any conscience? You will stay alive. Behind him, Effie ran to the edge of the island, summoning the dusk shard. As the swirl of sparks surrounded her hand, she jumped up and landed on a toppled pillar that lay parallel to the ground, rising slightly at the far end. The young girl rushed across the long pillar, and then leaped high into the air with all her prodigious strength, flying straight toward the kneeling giant's chest. As she flew, Effie activated the single enchantment of the heavy shield. Forged from a shard of a fallen star, this shield contains the weight of the heavens. Depending on the heart of its wielder, it can be light as a feather or heavy as regret. She poured her essence into the memory, making it feel as heavy as a mountain on her hand. A moment later, Effie crashed into the colossus with all that weight. The impact was not nearly as devastating as when Cassie had brought her ship down from the sky. But since Sun Prince was yet to regain his balance, it was just enough to push his upper body a little bit back. And that little bit was enough to send Sun Prince toppling over. A few seconds later, both of them, the giant immortal and the little girl, disappeared from view, falling over the edge of the island. down into the empty darkness of the sky below. Chapter 725, Shipwreck Island. As Sunny and Kai moved toward the wreck of the ancient ship, the heavenly chains suddenly rattled deafeningly, and the whole island quaked once more as it shifted higher. Turning back, they saw that the steel colossus was gone from the edge. Effie was nowhere in sight as well. Sunny stared at the empty space where the giant had been kneeling not too long ago, then gritted his teeth and looked away. Effie knew what she was doing. No one was more motivated to survive the nightmare and return to the waking world alive. Not even Sunny. She would not have done anything that would leave her no chance to escape. In any case, every one of them was in terrible danger. If Solvane managed to defeat Noctis, she would be coming for them next. And Cassie could have been dying or dead already, somewhere in the wreckage. There was no time to waste on unnecessary thoughts. Sunny dragged Kai forward, lamenting the fact that the archer was coming back to his senses so slowly. His incredible sight would have been very useful right about now. His four shadows flew toward the wreck, gliding between the debris in search of the young woman. However, it was hard to make out anything in the chaotic mess of splintered wood, upturned soil, and shredded sails. And then, finally, he thought that he noticed weak movement under a pile of debris. With his two hearts beating wildly, Sunny rushed forward, then threw a piece of the ship's hull aside and bent down, digging through the soil. Soon he saw a piece of black fabric, and then removed some more dirt to reveal Cassie's pale face. She struggled to sit and then coughed violently. The blind young woman seemed to be fine. The piece of cloth covering her eyes had slid down, revealing two empty eye sockets, and her dress was soaked with blood from the arrow wound on her shoulder. But other than that, there were only mild scratches and lacerations on her body. Miraculously, Cassie was alive. Sunny stared at her with wide eyes, a sense of profound relief slowly spreading through his chest. The young woman coughed some more, wiped the dirt off her face, then turned her head slightly with an uncertain and vulnerable expression. Who is there, Sunny?" He helped Kai sit down, then said, "Yes, it's me, but can't your ability tell?" Cassie grimaced. "I've run out of soul essence. Damnation." A stifled laugh escaped from his mouth. "That's what you are concerned with? You damned fool. What the hell was that stunt? How did you even survive the crash?" Cassie turned to him with a confused expression on her beautiful face. "How did I what? I jumped off the ship a few moments before it hit the prince, of course. Dancer carried me down. I am not crazy." He stared at her for a moment, then covered his face with a hand and let out a long, relieved sigh. "You've been spending too much time with me. Only a madman would call ramming a flying ship into an immortal steel giant at full speed not crazy." Now that he knew that the blind girl was alive, though, he could finally think about everything else. As cold shivers ran down his spine, Sunny turned and stared at the dark gaping hole in the hull of the crashed ship where Noctis and Solvane had disappeared. The wreckage was still trembling and groaning, proving that the two transcendents were still fighting inside. Cassie tried to stand up, fell back, then remained motionless for a few moments. "What is happening?" Sunny grimaced. "Effie is dealing with what is left of Sun Prince. Kai is here, but he had the wind knocked out of him. Noctis is also on the island. He seems to be losing to Solvane terribly." His shadows returned, wrapping themselves around his body and bringing with them vast and fearsome strength. Sunny lingered for a moment and then stood up. "You stay here with Kai and rest for a bit. I'll be back shortly." The blind young woman frowned, then hurriedly fumbled for her blindfold and pulled it up, covering the empty darkness of her missing eyes. "Well? Where are you going?" He looked at the wreckage for a few moments, and then smiled darkly. I am just going to return a debt." He owed Solvane quite a lot, after all. Months of agony and desperation, the life of a dear friend, and even a heart. When would he get a chance to repay her hospitality again? Leaving Cassie and Kai behind, Sunny gathered his courage and dashed toward the wreck. Jumping through the breach in the hull, he landed on the skewed floor of one of the compartments at the stern of the ship and froze for a moment, hit by a strong sense of déjà vu. All of this did it not feel very familiar? Was it not the same compartment he had entered the wreck through all that time ago, in the distant future, while hunting for miraculous coins. Of course, back then the ancient ship had looked vastly different, at least on the inside. It had been infested by a sprawling mass of brown vines and moss, the murky air full of poison they secreted. Back then, Sonny had not known who Noctis was, and how his ship had ended up broken and abandoned on a desolate island near the rift. Well, now everything fell in its place. This island was going to become the Shipwreck Island. The wound in the chest of the giant steel corpse, the terrible damage done to the bow of the crashed vessel, it all made sense now except for one thing. How would Solvane end up trapped for thousands of years in the cargo hold, so that Sonny could kill her in the future? Sonny did not consider his chances in a battle against the living embodiment of war to be very high. But the mere fact of knowing the future told him that it was not impossible to defeat her. At least, that was what he wanted to believe, sneaking through the broken ship as he came closer and closer to the sounds of the furious battle. If he was wrong, however, the possibility of Sonny himself becoming the host of a monstrous, corrupted parasite was not out of the question.